Prologue. Scanning the horizon, Noxel observed the numerous beautiful and harsh landscapes. Ahead of him lay a seemingly uncountable number of mountains, each with its own different ecosystems. Beyond the mountains lay the Great Plains, where many of the sentient races flourished and sought shelter from the monsters he and his siblings had brought to this world. And much further beyond that, dozens of planets of varying color and size orbited the massive titan of a planet on which he stood. From his position on the highest plateau, many of the planets passing appeared so close that he felt as if he could reach out and touch them right here and now. His gaze narrowed in on a small mountain as a poor soul unknowingly marched into the domain of a dragon. The battle, if it could be called that, ended decisively as the young warrior died quickly and needlessly. His head shook as his heart filled with sorrow. It was just one of the many thousands that died every day in the world he and his siblings had created, where the weak became the foundation for the strong. Behind him, a crack in space appeared. The spell was perfect, and under normal circumstances would have been impossible to detect. But it was his job to stand and observe, as it had been for the last 1,000 years. Widening, the crack in space unveiled a scene of the darkness and unknown white dots beyond, which he knew to be far-off stars. Closer was a curious green and blue planet, similar to some that orbited close overhead. He was reminded of how long it had been since he had last cleaned this plateau, as stones, pebbles, and other debris soared through the portal and out into space, never to be seen again. His clothes remained unruffled by the vacuum as he watched a familiar face appear on the other side, one he had not seen in nearly 1,000 years. Climbing through the being, brushed some non-existent dirt off her pristine outfit. "Welcome back, sister. It has been far too long." His face took on a stoic expression, not willing to show how much he actually did miss his sister. Giving her a once-over, he noticed Adara's appearance had not changed in the time she had been away. As always, she had a single intricate braid of golden flax hair flowing down her back. Her ears extended into sharp points, like the high elves whom she favored. She wore a summer dress that matched her hair and eyes. Noxel wasn't a man of fashion, but her clothing seemed unsuited for traveling through deep space, all even bothering with the fact that all of the gold colorings were a little gaudy in his opinion. But he wasn't going to make that known again, for that was one argument he would never win. "Indeed it has. I see you haven't changed much. I thought perhaps you would have a smile for your favorite sister," she replied with a sweet, loving smile. "Favorite? Bah! You know my favorite has always been Dahlia. She bothers me the least," Noxel replied, a slight smile forming on his face. "You weren't supposed to return for another few hundred years. Now tell me what has brought you back home so soon." Silence took over their reunion. She didn't have to say anything. Her early presence here could only mean foreboding news. Adara stared at her brother as her smile turned grim. "I've found more life out there, yet to be scoured by them. There won't be much time before they find them, so I had to rush back. I could sense them following behind me as I traveled through space." "Your outfit is so bright, it must have been like a beacon to them," Noxel muttered. The knowing glare he received quieted any further comments. Laying his palm out, he gestured for her to continue. "Along my journey, I found a small planet, third from a star. The inhabitants call it Earth. Yes, just like the ground," she shrugged. "Humans are what they call their species. Think themselves the center of the universe." Adara rolled her eyes exaggeratedly. "Like most species we've found, they thrive on conflict. Their conflict has brought innovation, however. Technological advancement has taken them into space, only barely. They are a species still in their infancy. Except for a few, they have yet to discover magic. The mana density being as sparse as it is where their planet is located has made them and the creatures on their planet very mundane." Noxel remained silent for a moment as he walked to the center of the plateau where 10 chairs rested. He sat down on the cold, hard stone chair with a grimace. Shifting about, he tried to get comfortable. "So what do you propose? That we call upon our brothers and sisters to bring these humans to our Myriad of Worlds? How do you even know if they would be worth the effort of saving?" With a heavy sigh, Adara sat upon a chair of green, transparent crystal jade. She drummed her fingers on the arm of the chair. Pulsing energy illuminated the frame at every touch. You are measuring them as they are now, and not their potential. Closing his eyes, Noxel grumbled, "Stop. I am tired and do not wish to have this discussion with you again." "Then you will help?" asked Adara. "You know I will. I would simply like to know if our investment will be worth it," Noxel grumbled. "Only time will tell," she said with a twinkle in her eyes. "Now come, time is money, or so they say on Earth. And they don't have much time remaining." Adara jumped out of her chair and clapped once. A spherical wave of energy released from the clap and flowed out into the expanse. Noxel watched the energy move, visible only to him and his siblings. It had passed through him instantly. He could feel the message come to his mind in Adara's voice, saying, "Meeting." He followed it with his eyes as it passed through the orbiting planets harmlessly. The wave of energy was a beacon that his brothers and sisters would surely answer, no matter wherever they be in the Myriad of Worlds. Eyes still on the beacon of energy that had now passed through half the planets, Noxol consulted his sister. "We will have to construct a planet or two for them and give the humans sanctuary. It will have to have a mundane environment. The way you make out the humans, they might be the weakest species to ever grace our Myriad of Worlds on their arrival. Just have faith, little brother. Faith, I'm a god." Chapter 1. Fight of his life. Ben felt like he had been fighting for hours, but for all he knew, it might have been only 20 minutes. Mana flowed as he ceaselessly expended it into spell after spell as he fought against numerous enemies, all attempting to take his life for reasons he was still unaware. Glancing at his remaining mana, he was aware he wouldn't be able to continue this fight for much longer. He had killed many of those attacking him, but for every opponent that fell, two would take their place in this frenzied battle. The enemy seemed to become further emboldened to kill him the more lives he took. He could feel the poison and curses from the wounds begin to affect him, making his mind hazy and disoriented. Ben chose to decrease his blood flow even further, making the spread of poison slower, but with all the wounds littered across his body, it did not seem to matter. Having access to blood magic was both a boon and a bane. It had quickly come to have a stigma against it because of many capabilities and uses, many of which were nefarious in nature. Despite humans being a part of the Myriad of Worlds for a short 27 years, some had used blood rituals and magic in a bid to advance in strength quickly without making the effort of fighting monsters. Animals, innocents, and virgins had all been sacrificed, which did not help either. This had already caused irreparable harm to the reputation of blood magic users like him. Although Ben was considered a hero, a savior of many, and one of the strongest humans to have advanced so far, there remained rumors about him and his rise to power due to his blood magic. The roaring sounds of magic knocked Ben out of his stupor. His brief reprieve was over as dozens of fireballs and other spells soared towards his position on the ground. They had been bombarding his location, pushing him throughout the once beautiful city after they discovered getting near him was a fatal mistake. The once bastion of civilization and strength was now awash with rubble and fires. His house was gone entirely, one of the first buildings to be destroyed in this battle for survival, as they tried to kill him in a desperate sneak attack. The sounds of cries and screams could be heard echoing through the field of debris. Many bystanders had been caught as collateral in the ensuing battle. The sound of their cries of terror caused him to grimace, but his mind was set on vengeance and survival. He called upon his wings of blood to catapult himself into the sky. The fireballs and spells came crashing down where he had just stood, throwing rock and stone everywhere. Even over 100 feet in the air, he could feel the intensity and burning of the fire. He was under no illusion. If he had not dodged, he would likely be dead now. Pulling what little blood he could spare from his wings without making them too small to support his flight, he commanded it into the shape of a spear. Thoughts of escape had long drifted from his mind as rage took over. Sensing blood that was not in his control approach, he readied himself. Whoever assassin was, they moved silently closer. Ben's fingers twitched as he held himself back, drawing the assassin in closer. Without moving his arm, the spear in his hand launched backward into the stomach of the assassin. Impaled inside the assassin's body, the spear expanded into dozens of spikes, skewering organs, bones, and even the assailant's heart. The spikes of blood exploded out of the body like a misshapen tree. "You have slain. Human, adept level 23. Ben's eyes widened in recognition. He had not recognized the blood signature, but that meant little since assassins specialized in stealth and camouflaging their abilities and presence. "Peter, they really have turned everyone against me." Peter had been like an uncle to him, someone who had been friends with his parents and him. Ben's heart tightened with the pain of having been betrayed by another to whom he was close. Hardening his resolve, Ben narrowed his eyes as he looked around for more potential enemies. The assassin remained skewered on the blood spear hovering in the air. His body was rigid as the tree of blood kept him steady. Ben called to the blood of the newly dead to gather into his spear. It only took a few seconds for the body to be sucked dry into a husk of itself. Commanding the now larger blood spear to fly back towards him, he willed the blood to separate as it began to flow around him in circles like a river of dark red liquid. Tired of this game of cat and mouse, he sensed about 100 people moving towards him. Ben prepared what was possibly his final spell. He knew this was a do-or-die moment. He recognized many of the blood signatures approaching him, but 10 among them stood out. Those 10 being the same magical tier of the profound realm as himself. They were forerunners of humanity, some of the strongest warriors. Thank the gods there isn't anyone stronger here. Although extremely rare, a few people had already passed the 4th realm of power that Ben was currently in. Floating in the air, Ben activated Blood Tempest with nearly all his remaining mana. The blood streaming around him split apart into thousands of droplets, all separated from each other. Pushing with his will, he directed the blood forward at its maximum velocity towards the oncoming enemies. There was no controlling where each droplet of blood would go. He could only aim in a general direction, as the spell was more like shotgun buck spreading out than a rifle. Shields and barriers appeared to stop the oncoming tide of blood. Ben watched the wall of red reach the enemy as it pierced into them. A symphony of sounds began all at once. The crashing and exploding of rocks, the sound of breaking glass, screams of agony and pain as thousands of tiny holes punctured through their defenses. Bodies began dropping from the sky. Buildings pierced by the blood began to crumble apart. Not all shields and barriers were penetrated, some still stood relatively unharmed due to the nature of the spell spreading out the damage instead of focusing it. Ben frowned. Usually he would empower the spell with his life force, but he barely had any left. There had been no opportunity to replenish his vitality from the bodies as long-range bombardments were constantly harassing him, denying him the necessary time. Such an obvious flaw in his class had made itself apparent during the most crucial of times. Notifications reached his mind as the number of slain grew. He quickly checked the slain notification to see if he had gotten anyone of note, but he knew it wasn't the case. To his surprise, he had only had notifications for about 1/4 of the people he had seen coming. Despite having killed many foes, Ben was losing this battle of attrition as his resources kept being used. Blood Champion has reached profound level 82. He threw 5 attributes into intelligence, not that it would help. A moment later, he felt the flow slow down. Lucian was nearby. He narrowed his eyes and formed a sword of blood with his remaining mana. The blood signature belonging to Lucian appeared behind him. Turning, he whipped his blood sword in a horizontal slash, only for it to be blocked by one of Lucian's blades already in position. Having lost his positional advantage, Ben knew he was in a bad situation. He was not a close combat specialist, comparable to Lucian, who excelled in such combat. "Lucian, please," Ben pleaded to his best friend. They remained frozen for a moment, looking into each other's faces, swords still pushed against the other. There was a moment where he felt him relax until Lucian's eyes hardened and he tensed. Still parrying, Lucian's other arm moved quickly, thrusting his second sword forwards. He tried to block it with the only thing available, his hand. The blade pierced straight through and into his torso, puncturing the left lung. The sword wrenched out of his body. Ben gasped for breath. Poisoned blood began spilling into his lung. All he could feel was burning in every shallow breath he took. His breathing accelerated as they tried to compensate for the lack of air. His mind was too disarrayed to stop the blood flooding his lung. Darkness crept into his vision for a moment until he blinked it away. He felt like a corpse floating in the air. Every action seemed to take more effort to complete. His crimson bloodwings kept him aloft. The combination of poison, curses, and wounds had done their job as he teetered on the edge of death in front of the one who betrayed him. Unforgivable, unforgivable. With a sudden spike of energy, Ben roared, "I'll take you with me, you bastard." Using what little life force remained, he empowered his next spell, pulling the blood spilling from his chest, and constructed it into a lance half hidden inside his body. Launching it at Lucian, the spell never struck. Somehow Lucian reacted and slowed down the lance just enough to dodge out of its way. At the same moment, the lance was dodged. With the last of his energy, Ben slashed his bloodsword down in a vertical swing at Lucian's dodging form, guessing where he would move. He felt resistance for a moment as it connected with a piece of Lucian's shoulder armor. The last thing he saw was Lucian's pained expression as Ben's eyes and mind went dark. Ben awoke flat on his back. Sitting up, he tried to catch his breath, but was only able to pull in a little air at a time. It didn't take a genius to guess that his lungs were barely functioning. One of them had stopped working entirely, the other was corroded by poison, ready to stop at any moment. Perhaps it was the lack of blood in his body because of all the wounds, but he was beginning to feel tired and cold. Keeping his eyes open was becoming increasingly difficult with every passing second. An unnatural cold and tiredness settled through his body. How strange it was considering it was the middle of the warm season. Forcing his eyes open wide, he could see nothing but a hellscape that one would imagine when thinking of the end of times. Fire, rubble, and bodies littered the once great city of New Hope, the capital of the Human Forward Alliance. New Hope had been the city in which he had grown up for his entire life. Granted, the city had only been about 1 year older than him. Created soon after, some of humanity had come to this Myriad of Worlds. There was very little that could be done to salvage the city. Ben's eyes slipped closed for a moment, but they flashed open. His head dipped. Recovery was beyond him at this point. His body had passed the point where it was only a matter of time. Only through his blood magic had he been allowed to live beyond what should have been possible. His life force had been much like a roaring bonfire before. Now it was like coals that had been splashed by a bucket of water, slowly growing colder as the heat escaped. The cost of using his life force so often during the battle had been too damaging, as Ben had been pushed past the point where he could no longer recover his vitality on his own. Not even a healer could save him now. Despite the warm breeze from the wind blowing past the fires scattered across the city, his body continued to feel colder as it responded less and less. "A nice nap is what I need right about now," he thought to himself as his world became darker, as his eyes began to slide closed. Something nudged his shoe. "He is still alive. I didn't receive the notification yet. I bet he is close to death with all those wounds." A mysterious voice he recognized instantly spoke from the darkness. Ben opened his right eye, since his left eye was no longer cooperating and refused to budge. With his head dipped, all he saw was a familiar pair of boots. With a colossal effort, he lifted his head up as he stared at what used to be his best friend, Lucian. Regret and anger flashed through him. Bright, glowing green eyes of his once friend gazed back into his with no discernible emotion behind them. Perhaps feeling guilt for what he had done to him, Lucian was the first to break eye contact as he looked up to what Ben sensed were many spectators in the near distance. They all seemed to be keeping their distance for now. Glancing at Lucian's body, he was relatively unscathed, except for the obvious missing left arm cut at the shoulder. The wound already healed enough for the blood to stop, likely from someone nearby. A dull silver sword speckled with his own blood sat in his other hand, aimed towards the ground. If Ben could manage the energy to smile, he would, feeling quite pleased with himself for at least taking something from the bastard, despite the unlikely odds. Unfortunately, Lucian's youthful, sculpted-looking face and coal-black hair remained whole and untouched. "Need a hand?" Ben sputtered out between breaths, feeling some energy coming back to him, even if it was only to fuck with Lucian before he died. All he received was a glare in response. Lucian's knuckles turned whiter as he gripped the handle of his sword. After a moment, Lucian spoke. "It's just like you to make light of all this." His voice was clear and monotone. "Easier to make light of it than to accept that my best friend betrayed me and schemed to kill me. Did our entire friendship mean nothing? Are all those times I saved you forgotten? Ben wanted to scream, but his voice came out in a low rasp. It's really nothing personal, Ben, Lucian said with a shoulder shrug, his face a mask of controlled emotions. I'm only doing what is necessary to save us. Necessary? Why did my parents have to die? How is that necessary? Ben whispered, his voice low and hoarse. The taste of blood was thick in his mouth. Lucian froze for a split second, as if a lightning bolt had struck him. I did initially want to avoid collateral damage, but I knew your guard would be down if you were with your parents. You really didn't make this easy. Even now, broken and bleeding all over, wounds littered across your body, you cling to life with tenacity even I find frightening. I was hoping a surprise attack would kill you, but I guess you didn't become one of the strongest human fighters for nothing. Lucian monologued, all while staring back into Ben's eyes. His voice was cold, face a mask of absolute indifference. I feel as if I should even applaud you for all the people you were able to kill despite being on the back foot the entire battle. All my preparations were nearly for naught, Lucian explained, turning his head slowly from left to right as he glanced around at what could only be the ruins of the once lively city. Unfortunately, many of the people you killed were skilled and had potential. People capable of one day bridging the gap in strength between humans and the other species out there, Lucian continued with a sigh. I killed, Ben sputter, growling which turned into him coughing blood. He tried to give his best one-eye glare. We both know it was you and your army who killed these people and destroyed their city. Lucian gave him a sideways glance, unconcerned. I was thinking something simple, like hero betrays the human forward alliance, destroys the city of New Hope and its people. Bringing one hand to his chin, he sarcastically contemplated the false title. Could use some work, I guess, but the short of it is that you will be blamed for the death of this city and its people. I believe the phrase goes, it is the winner who narrates history. You really like hearing yourself talk, huh? Ben rasped so low that he could barely hear himself. His body felt like ice, at least in the parts he could still feel. Lucian, you had your talk. End him now. Let's be done with this. Everyone is watching. A familiar voice came from above. In his dimming vision, Ben could see multiple silhouettes of people once well known to him. Now he wasn't certain he had ever known them, for their betrayal spoke volumes of his knowledge of them. These were people he had trusted, fought with, and even saved. But they had all taken Lucian's side during the battle, perhaps even before. Fine. Goodbye, old friend, Lucian muttered softly. Raising his hand, Lucian's sword trembled lightly. A single tear fell as he pulled his arm back and stabbed forth. There was no pain as the sword pierced his heart. Knowing it would be a matter of seconds, Ben's eyes began to close. The last thing he saw was the many beautiful and colorful worlds above him. I never got to visit them. He felt a tug at his soul as eternal darkness descended upon his mind. Unable to resist the pull, he let go. Chapter 2. Reborn. Ben awoke to the sound of screaming, only to find himself enveloped by liquid and darkness. The source of the yelling was a woman who sounded as if she was being tortured. It wasn't until he heard a muffled, "Breathe, one last push," that all the clues came together. He had become reborn as an infant and was in the process of being birthed. He was thankful that his eyes hadn't been able to open during the process, as the sound and feel of being birthed would probably haunt him for eternity. The entire process had been horrific enough to distract him from recent events. It was then that he remembered as everything started coming back to him. His death, his parents' death, Lucian's betrayal. Grief and sorrow flooded him. Tears began spilling as he mourned the loss of his family and the loss of his friends through their betrayal. Wailing, he screamed his frustration. "He's crying. That's a good sign," he heard from the darkness. It was a voice unknown to him. He felt the rough touch of a towel wiping him down, distracting him from his mourning. His thoughts shifted. How am I even alive? Even tired and bloodied, he remembered everything about those last moments. He was certain Lucian's sword had pierced his heart. There was no reason he should be alive right now. Should I really question such good fortune? He was stumped. Magic was a miracle, but this seemed beyond what anyone was capable of. He had no powers to reverse time, change fate, or reincarnate. Did someone else do this? But who and how? Wait, reverse time? Is it possible I'm in the past? The air chilled his body until he was wrapped in a blanket and passed off to what he assumed was a man. The rough pair of hands grabbed at him and squeezed a little too hard, making him cry out with pain. "Why is everyone here beating up on a baby?" Ben howled. Instantly, he found himself stolen from the hooligan who had mishandled him and placed into the arms of a person he instinctively knew to be his mother. The instant he was in her arms, a serene calm washed over him. "Honey, you really need to control your strength. We talked about this," his new mother reprimanded with a sharp tone. Her voice was obviously tired. "Alyssa, a heel if you would please." Ben's heart broke. Unbridled tears spilled out again. The voice belonging to the woman holding him wasn't his mother. Or rather it was, but not the one he knew. As he started crying, her hold tightened around him, as was held protectively against her chest. "Guess this means it's not the past." A flow of warmth radiated throughout his body. It felt like life magic. But he was struggling to tell. He felt very tired and disoriented from all the events since he awoke. The pain in his bruised thigh vanished almost instantly. This gave Ben reassurance. With the magic, it was a safe assumption that he was still in the Myriad of Worlds. "I just hope I'm still human. I don't think I would mind being reborn as a different species, but I can't say I didn't mind being a human before. I don't feel a tail or extra limbs, so that at least excludes a few options. Shit, I'm starting to make myself nervous. Nervous and hungry." Squirming, he tried to move his arms to feel his body, but they weren't responding well. "Look at him. He's beautiful," his mother whispered. Her voice sounded hoarse from what he presumed to be all the yelling and screaming during his birth, about which he was still coming to grips. Shivering unconsciously, he recalled the recent traumatic memories. "I think I'd rather be killed again than go through that process a second time. Come to think of it. How long has it been since the battle with Lucian and the others happened?" He couldn't recall anything that would explain his current situation. There were too many questions and no answers. His only chance of finding answers was to be patient and search for them when he became older. Without warning, the door to the room slammed open and 2 pairs of footsteps came stomping in across the wooden floorboard. He could hear his mother sigh and the male he assumed to be his father groan. "Mommy, mommy, mommy!" yelled squeaky voices that didn't stop from the moment they entered the room until the instant they were right beside him. "No, you promised I could see him first. I'm the oldest," responded a youthful boy's voice. "You two are going to wake the baby," his mother said, hushing the 2 children. "So, what's his name?" asked a childlike voice that he guessed was his older sister. There was a small moment of silence. "We were thinking you two could pick, as long as you can both agree on it," responded a gruff male voice. This was the first time Ben had heard this voice. He could only assume belonged to his father. "How about Matt?" asked his sister. "Boring," denied his brother. Ben hoped this wouldn't take too long. He was already beginning to become tired. He also wanted to have some input over his new name, but it wasn't like he could just speak his objection. "Kevin," yelled his sister. "No, there is already a Kevin in the village, besides Kevin's gross." His older brother rejected. "How about Meatloaf?" There was a pause while what Ben could only assume was the family staring at their oldest son in question, while they contemplated his sanity. A chill ran over Ben as he froze in fear for a moment before he wailed aloud to protest the terrible name. "What? I'm hungry. You guys were in here forever," his brother defended himself. His sister giggled, making Ben fearful she was about to agree. His father gave a deep belly laugh. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to veto that name, little one." "How about Jax?" asked Alyssa. Ben wailed again in response. Denied. "I guess that name is rejected," mused his father. Kaismo came from a previously unknown voice that made him unable to determine its location. He could tell it was feminine in nature. He wasn't aware there had been an additional person in the room with them until now. Your ancestors would seek out answers in the night sky and make decisions based on what they saw. To be born on the starry night when the cosmos is in their brightest radiance could be considered a good omen. Spoke the mysterious voice once again. It was difficult to tell where the source of the voice was coming from. After a moment of silence, he could hear his father's musing tone. Well, it certainly is different. What do you kids think about it? It's weird, his sister giggled, but I like it. I like it too, came from his brother. Okay, then it's settled. Your name will be Kai, came a tranquil voice from the darkness as Kai unwillingly fell asleep. It had been around 6 months since his rebirth, and Kai had noticed several things. According to his parents' constant commentary and concern, he apparently required quite a lot more sleep compared to when his older siblings had been infants. Kai surmised after a while that this was a result of his frequent headaches, due to his experienced and established mind and memories trying to process everything in an undeveloped infant's brain. The additional sleep was needed to combat the stress from overusing parts of the brain not yet developed enough to handle complex emotions and thinking. He did notice that he was requiring less sleep than usual as he grew older, but according to his family, he was still above the average. Not being able to move properly or hold a conversation was taking its toll on him. Mentally, he was going a little stir-crazy with nothing else to do but observe all day. His only view was whatever room he was currently in, which was almost always where his mother was. With the immense amount of free time, he would spend his days observing his family. It didn't take long to figure out his new family was very kind and loving. They were attentive to his needs, especially his mother, Rachel. When his eyes opened and stopped being blurry, Kai was relieved to find out that his family was in fact human. His mother appeared to be young and pretty. Kai assumed she was no more than 30 years old, despite her looking 20. But with magic in play, there was a good chance she could have been older than she appeared. At first, he thought his mother might be an angel. Behind her loving smile was fair, unblemished skin and dimpled cheeks, framed by shoulder-length flaxen hair. What stood out among the pale and blonde was her exquisite eyes, so perfectly grey they reminded him of a painting. During those 6 months since he had been reborn, there were very few times his mother hadn't been by his side except during the night when he slept. His father, on the other hand, spent much of his time outside of the house. He wouldn't describe his father as a cold person, but his work seemed to keep him out of the house quite often, apparently employed as the captain of the guard for the village he lived in. Oddly, the most distinguishing feature of his father was his tanned skin, which seemed out of place compared to the few other people Kai had seen. Perhaps it indicated his father as a foreigner to these parts. Everyone else throughout the village who had visited him was fair-skinned as if they were untouched by the suns. Opposite his mother's soft curves, his father seemed to have a face and body sculpted by an artist, making a legend come to life. The man bolstered an impressive physique, something that could only have been achieved from years of training and dedication. His dark brown hair was cut much like a seasoned soldier that matched his warrior physique. His father possessed a roughish handsomeness that seemed to incite his mother to call her husband a bandit after stealing her heart. Kai had barfed the first time he had heard that. Despite being physically intimidating, his father always had a kind and gentle expression on his face around his family. Kai wondered how Garen, his older brother of 8 years, could look so much like their angelic mother but be so different from her kind, compassionate nature. Kai often found himself getting into staring contests with his older brother, at least until the novelty phase had ended sometime during the last few months. Garen had turned from an interested and playful older brother to one that seemed wary of Kai. His grey eyes observed Kai to the point of being unnerving sometimes, as if he was a newly discovered species. Luckily, they weren't eyes of hostility, but they weren't friendly either. It can't be something I said. Kai was still waiting a few more months until he would begin talking. His last sibling, Lydia, had mixed features of both parents like golden brown hair, which she kept most often in braids. Similar to their older brother and mother, she sported the family's grey eyes as well. She possessed the boundless energy that every 4-year-old had and made it a point of proving it. Whether it be giggles, excited yelling, or crying, Kai was sure he was beginning to go deaf. It felt like the only reprieve he had was during the night when she was asleep. "Look, honey, he is awake," Kai's new mother called out. Laying on his back, he looked up at both of his parents who were hovering over him. Each was making funny faces, while his father tried to tickle him. He resisted with all his might, but he couldn't help but let out a giggling laugh. The tickle had overpowered his resistance, causing him to leak a little pee. Not that he would ever admit it. "He is a cutie," his mother stated. "That he is. He is going to be a lady killer when he gets older," his father spouted proudly. "Of course he is. He takes after you, after all." Kai's mother stared lovingly at her husband, maybe even a little lust not so well hidden in her eyes. Kai rolled his eyes. Too often Kai would have to pretend to cry when his parents started getting frisky in front of him. By now they had learned their lesson. "Really, I thought he looked more like you, except for those eyes. I thought he'd have grey eyes like his brother and sister," his father said, none the wiser he was being stared at like a dessert. "Well, blue and grey eyes are pretty similar from what I've heard." "His hair takes after yours, though, a thick dark brown," his mother said while rubbing his hair, her attention shifting back to Kai. Kai was surprised. A part of him had been afraid there was a chance he would look the same as in his past life. According to his parents, his eyes were the same color as when he was Ben, which could have been a coincidence. At least his hair color had changed. "If my hair is different, then there is a good chance I won't look the same." His parents continued playing with him until his father tickled him so much that he ended up pooping himself. This is beyond mortifying. No one must ever find out. "Are you sure you have to leave tomorrow?" asked his mother while changing his diaper. He saw his father nod. "Yay. I need to collect some intel. The Heart Empire looks like they may want to expand east soon. They nearly conquered their neighbors to the west, last I heard." A loud sigh escaped his mother. You would figure after nearly 1250 years in the Myriad of Worlds, humanity would unite, not fight against each other so much. We have so many more enemies now than the humans of the past did. Kai's infant eyes went wide. Almost 1250 years have passed. It can't be. This was the first time any year had been mentioned since he was reborn. In the short 26 years he had been alive, progress and change were constant. One could imagine how much had changed in over 1,000 years. Kai couldn't help but think of his old family during his time spent simmering as an infant. They had given him so much. Watching them die in his house, unable to protect them, still caused him agony in his heart. He blamed himself for their death. For him, it didn't feel that long since that incident. The memories of that last battle felt like it had been only minutes before he had been reborn. Even 6 months later, the pain and raw emotions were fresh and hadn't quelled. His new mother jokingly told him he looked like an angry baby often. In his previous life, Ben had been a part of the first generation of humans to be born in the Myriad of Worlds. His parents had been pregnant with him when they crossed the spatial portals to this world, or worlds along with a few million other humans that were crazy enough to believe the mysterious entities when they said their sanctuary awaited them beyond the portal. The appearance of godlike beings and portals to another world enticed many with the promises of exploration, fighting monsters, and exploring the limitless potential of a new world. His father, Mick, a professor of physics during his time on Earth, had wanted to study physics in another world. His mother, Jeanne, had been a professional gamer and streamer during her youth in MMORPG games, whatever those were. Between the two of them, she had been the one who was most prepared for this new realm. Although not a combatant like Kai had been, she taught him most of what he knew. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that she was the sole reason why he had claimed a place among some of the strongest humans, despite others having a 16-year head start on him. Equally, if not more influential in his life, Lucian often came to mind. No matter how much he pondered the subject, there was no logical explanation why Lucian would fabricate a lie and betray him except perhaps for jealousy. Even then, the motive was flimsy, because Lucian had been heralded as one of the strongest human forerunners as well. Lucian had been 6 years old when he came to the Myriad of Worlds with his parents. Almost 7 years older than Kai was. He had to wait for 10 years to turn 16, for that was when humans unlocked their magic. And just like Kai, he proved his aptitude for magic and fighting. He grew in levels and realms faster than most, as he caught up to those who had years of advantage over him. There was little doubt that Lucian would have continued to progress in magical strength over the 12 centuries unless a monster or others had killed him. Kai felt certain, however, that Lucian still lived and had continued to progress to the highest realm of magical power. He had quickly become one of the most cunning and intelligent fighters to have ever been produced by humans. If Lucian and the others who betrayed him were alive to this day, then Kai would eventually get his revenge. Even with a 1250-year head start, he would grow in power and magic and find them and kill them. "What's a matter, sweetie? Have to make a poopy?" His mother peered over him, looking at his angry, scrunched-up face. Chapter 3. Birthday Party. Pain like Kai hadn't felt in a long time enveloped his stomach as he felt himself get sucker-punched while he slept. Groaning and opening his eyes, he could see his assaulter was not a fist like he first believed, but a knee. A small knee with mighty power backed by the momentum of a jump. "Happy birthday, Kai," yelled a high-pitched voice, as if to make a point that if the knee of punishment hadn't woken him up, her voice would. Too late to play dead and fall back to sleep now that he had reacted, Kai grumbled and shifted until the offending knee moved off his stomach. As the blanket slid down his body, the morning chill was the first thing he noticed as goosebumps formed on his arms. He looked to his side where his younger sister now sat staring at him with a mischievous smile. At 3.5 years old, Ariel was the bane of his existence in the mornings for the past half-year. He was certain that his little sister and their mother had some sort of deal, colluding and conspiring to ruin his mornings by not allowing him to sleep in. Kai reached out and ruffled her blonde hair as he swung his legs off his bed. Stepping onto the wooden floorboards, he left his back exposed to the impish 3-year-old. Knowing full well what was coming next, he prepared himself and she vaulted herself onto his back, wrapping her arms around his neck. Grabbing onto her thighs, he hoisted her up into a piggyback position. "Onwards, my mighty steed," Ariel called out with a giggle, pointing her finger forwards to the open doorway. Kai ran through the halls following the smell of the cinnamon aroma to the kitchen. His mother stood in front of the large hearth, stirring 3 massive pots of what he knew to be his favorite food, cinnamon chunk stew. An odd food for breakfast, but they were having dinner with grandfather later tonight, so he wouldn't be able to eat it then. His father had made a special trip to the capital to buy cinnamon just for his birthday meal. Looking at the mostly empty table, Kai could see his older sister staring at the pot of bubbling stew, a small line of drool escaping her lips. His mother turned to Kai, giving him a loving smile. "Ariel, would you please be a dear and go get your father and your brothers?" she asked, noticing Kai's current situation as Ariel was still clinging onto his back like a baby monkey. He noticed the fire below the stew go out, a layer of ash smothering it. "Roger," Ariel said as she hopped off and lightly padded through the house until he heard the front door open and close. "Happy 8th birthday, sweetie," Rachel enveloped him in a hug. Kai closed his eyes, letting the tranquil aura wash over him. It felt too good to be true, to have been given a second chance at life, and one with a family so doting and caring. Quite often he found himself doubting, wondering if he should abandon his plans of revenge. Not only was the task of revenge a monumental undertaking, assuming Lucian and the others still lived, but it could possibly put his new family at risk. Even 8 years later, the desire for revenge was like a wound in his heart that wouldn't heal. Taking a step back, the hug ended. He looked to his left, where his sister still sat at the table, chin on the table, staring at him with eyes that screamed, "Sit down so we can eat already." Getting the message, Kai walked over to the table and took his normal seat. A yellow blur raced across the room and sat down in the chair next to him. 3 others followed behind a moment later. "Finally! Look who finally decided to wake up. I thought we were never going to have breakfast," his younger brother Jacob pointed out. Unlike his father and older brother, Jacob, who was 2 years younger, was a lot more outgoing and sociable. Because of their age similarity, their parents often had them spend time together, which ended with them often competing, even when Kai was not trying to. Kai's older brother Garen strolled across the room. Piles of floating ash hovered above his head, his face scrunched up in concentration as he controlled it. His father Octavian came in last, giving Kai a quick hug. He retched from the smell of his armpits that was right near his nose. Giving his father a small push away, he mumbled his thanks, while mock gasping for breath. No one laughed because they had all been in Kai's shoes once or twice. "Garen, please put your magic away at the table," Rachel asked. The magic itself evaporated into thin air as if it hadn't existed. With everyone seated with food in front of them, breakfast commenced. Kai looked at his father and brother. One had very little sweat, while the other looked worn and ragged. Garen kept his head down as he piled food into his mouth. Their morning workout must have made him famished. As usual, he didn't look or say anything to Kai, not even a happy birthday. His attempts at forging a brotherly connection had never come to fruition. The older Kai got, the more distant Garen became. He seemed to get along with their other three siblings, however. Noticing his despondent face, Octavian grabbed a large ladleful of cinnamon chunk stew, plopping more down into Garen's bowl. "Why so sad? Girl problems?" Octavian said with a knowing smirk. Kai choked a little, his face immediately turned red. "Where did you hear about that?" he hissed while looking around the table to find the one who spilled the beans. His childhood friend, Shelley, who was the only other child his age in the village that he spent time with, had confessed her love to him yesterday. It had surprised him, but he had calmly and sensibly turned her down. Kai had no proof, but he suspected his mother and Shelley's parents were conspiring to set them up. Needless to say, he felt rotten because he had made an 8-year-old cry. Pointing his wooden spoon at his mother, his eyes narrowed in a glare. "First off, I'm 8. I'm way too young to be considering such nonsense as love and marriage. Second, I'm aware you are trying to trap me to keep me in the village. My answer hasn't changed. I want to go to the Magic Academy as father did, and then see the world." That was his stock answer for wanting to leave the village. The true reason was more violent. Seeing her about to make a counter-argument, Kai spoke. "Please don't make me use my birthday wish on this." Kai looked between both parents, pleading to let the situation end. His siblings remained quiet as they watched the drama unfold. Tears threatened to spill from his mother's eyes, but reluctantly she gave him a nod. Kai narrowed his eyes again. There is no way she would give up this easily. I'll have to continue to be on guard. Changing the subject, his father interrupted. "So, now that you're 8 years old, you're halfway to being an adult. As per tradition, you can have a special birthday wish on your 8th birthday. What is it you wish for?" Kai had long decided to do everything he could to gain strength and power so he would never find himself in a situation like before. He had been too weak to save his parents, but this time he would do everything possible to amass strength and magic so he could never find himself in a situation like before. He had been waiting for this moment for years. Garen had begun sword training under their father when he turned 8. Their father wouldn't allow them to train before then, claiming it was too much responsibility for a child to begin learning the sword earlier. The fact that his father was willing to teach him at all was fortunate. If his mother had it her way, there would be no weapon training whatsoever. I want to learn the sword from father as brother has." With a beaming smile, Octavian nodded his head, clearly happy to have 2 sons take after him. "I want to learn the sword too," Jacob yelled suddenly. "Me too," giggled Ariel, clearly just wanted to join in the fun of the conversation. "Jacob, Ariel, if you both want to learn the sword, you will need to wait. Not only is learning the sword a huge responsibility, but it requires a lot of effort and focus. You two are too young right now. There is also a better chance at injury and mishap the younger you are." His father countered the two as he shut down any further arguments. Jacob shot Kai a sour look. Although it was immature, Kai gave Jacob a winning smile to celebrate his victory, while knowing he was adding fuel to the fire of their sibling rivalry. Being treated as a child made him sometimes act like the child he was supposed to be. Not that he minded. Having fun and enjoying life was a good change from what he used to do. It was a childhood he had missed back when things were more turbulent. "Kai, we can begin your training when I get back from bringing your brother to the academy. I know you want to start immediately, but please be patient. His first year of academy starts in 5 days. My father brought me to my first day at the academy, and I would like to do the same for you both," Octavian continued. "That's fine," replied Kai, nodding his head. It wasn't an unreasonable request. A few knocks landed on the front door. Garen, who had hardly stopped eating throughout the entire conversation, stood up and went for the door. A few moments later, Garen walked back into the kitchen with an army of foxes following behind. There had to have been at least 100. After 8 years in the village, Kai was quite sure this wasn't all the foxes in the village at present. They almost never came together, but even when they did, they moved around too much to count. The floor was completed, covered by the orange, white, and black furry creatures. His mother stood up and started to pour the remaining stew into giant bowls. "I wish they could have waited until we all finished eating," she muttered. She started to lay the bowls of stew onto the floor. Kai watched in fascination as the foxes split into equal groups and waited for a bowl to be brought to them. The people and chief of the village claimed the foxes were guardians of the village. It was said that the foxes had made a deal with the village chief 1,000 years ago. The agreement was that they would grant the residents of Kitsune village privacy and protection in exchange for food. Apparently, there was more to the deal, but Kai had stopped listening to the obviously made-up bedtime story. Strangely, there had never been any danger or attack on the village from either monsters or other sentient beings, so maybe there was a tiny amount of truth to the tale, or the more likely option that the mists had obscured the village from any outsiders. Kai spied one of the white-colored foxes on his back, burping. It had already finished its share of the food from the large bowls his mother put out. It couldn't be more obvious that they were spoiled, domesticated foxes, as if anyone could believe otherwise. Besides the occasional nip when someone got too rough, the foxes had never harmed or attacked anyone. Even though Kai didn't yet have his magic, he was sure that even if he had the Identify spell, these foxes would only be labeled as creatures in the First Realm, or the proper title known as the Foundation Realm. The Foundation Realm was the most versatile and diverse of all the realms of power. It ranged from domesticated animals to baby monsters and weak monsters. Realms and levels approximated a being's strength and could not always be judged by face value. Currently, Kai wasn't even in any realm of power. He was technically in the mortal stage, better known as Realm Zero, the time before someone unlocks their magic. It was a rule imposed by the gods who'd created these worlds. A human could not access their magic until the individual was 16 years of age, while Kai had since found out it varied for other species. Meanwhile, goblins unlocked their magic at only 2 years of age. The theory in his past life was that it was the age the gods determined a human would be able to withstand the physical and mental burdens of magic. His past mother, Jeanne, had dubbed what the gods created as the magic system, a system designed for those who use it to comprehend and grow their magical path. With it, you could access the statistic and spell sheets that appeared in one's mind. To be able to create a domain millions of miles large where everyone had access to their own personalized status sheets was terrifying to think about. "Kai," Ariel asks, waving a hand in front of his daydreaming face. Turning to his little sister, he could see she had a mess of food on her face. Picking up a napkin, he dabbed at her face, eliciting a giggle in response. "What magic element do you want to learn, Kai?" Lydia asked. He had missed most of the previous conversation about which magic element was the coolest. A common topic amongst the family. I'm not really sure. Maybe blood or metal." Kai had given this question thought many times. Affinity to certain magical elements was believed to be in part comprehension, bloodline, exposure, and luck. All factors added together when the individual turned of age, granting the opportunity to pick an element if you had an affinity towards it. Both are strong elements. Each can be further empowered or complemented by learning the sword as well. If you gain and pick metal, I would be very happy. But I would be happy no matter what element you pick. You will have to be careful if you do choose blood magic. Some cities regulate it, while others ban it entirely, explained his father. Too curious not to ask, Kai inquired further, "Why is there such a stigma against blood magic?" Octavian began, "Well, there are quite a few reasons. The goblin blood shamans of the Serendale Mountains are well known for ritual sacrifices to empower themselves. An empowered shaman could fight above its realm of power. This caused quite a few headaches hundreds of years ago. For humans, the practice of blood magic is generally seen as immoral in nature. There are many stories in which humans abused blood magic, but there is one story in particular that stands out. It's a bit of an infamous story since it happened shortly after the humans appeared in the Myriad of Worlds. It's one that I've heard quite a few times over the years. The human blood demon, a man heralded as a hero. He was one of the humans' strongest after their appearance in the Myriad of Worlds. But it turned out he was nothing but a villain in truth. He had used blood magic to further his goals and ambitions of becoming one of the strongest. Valiant heroes and adventurers confronted him only to be destroyed. After a hard-fought battle in which hundreds died and a city crumbled, the human blood demon was finally put down. It is not a magic that garners a lot of respect, regardless of one's position. Other races do not frown upon blood magic like humans, but we are still rather new to the Myriad of Worlds. We still have perceived morals brought from Earth that have been passed down to this day. Kai squeezed his fists under the table. He grimaced as the story was obviously referring to him. He was silent for a time as he thought about the story. I guess unlocking blood magic again is out of the question, even if I have an affinity for it this time around. I can't risk being found out or held back because of blood magic. He felt someone wrap their arms around his chest from behind. He looked up to see his mother glaring at his father. "Enough talk. Can't you see you're scaring him?" she commanded. "You pick whatever magic you want, sweetie. You will always be welcome here." He felt tiny hands grab onto his shirt as his little sister Ariel also hugged him. Feeling their love and acceptance, Kai swore he would get powerful enough to protect his family. If he could do it during humanity's most uncertain and trying times, then he would ascend even further and higher, and when he was ready, take his long-awaited revenge. Chapter 4. A Little Exploration. Kai's father was due to return in 2 days. He had been gone nearly a week after he left to drop off Garen at the Ashbourne Academy, an academy for young adults newly awakened to magic who wanted to learn to use said magic in combat settings while learning about the world at large. During the last 8 years, Kai had never been allowed outside of the village. Even though it was claimed to be fairly safe due to regular patrol by the villager guard, they still wouldn't let anyone outside without authorized access. Thus, today he decided there was no better time to explore the area than while his father was away, and his mother was out. Besides, he wasn't planning on going far. He just felt trapped, needing to wait another 8 years until he could leave for the Magic Academy. First thing first, he had to somehow ditch his sisters and little brother. His mother, who was visiting a friend's house, had put him in charge of watching his siblings. Him. Why the hell had he been put in charge of watching them, and not his older sister of 3 years? Looking at Lydia, the answer was obvious. She was sleeping on the couch in the middle of the day without a care in the world. A flash of irritation passed through him until he came up with a devious plan to get payback on his sister for saddling him with all the responsibility. He peeked at his younger siblings who were engrossed in their game of checkers. Tapping Jacob on the shoulder, Kai got his attention before taking his cup of water and pouring half of it on himself. Jacob's eyes went wide in confusion and disbelief. Kai smirked and turned to his sleeping sister and splashed her with the rest of the water. He quickly turned to his brother and put the cup in his hand, schooling his face in anger. Lydia woke up with a primal scream, ready to kill whoever had disturbed her slumber. She sat up, eyes shifting to each person with a wild glare, looking for the individual who would dare disturb her slumber. "You? Why?" she yelled, glaring Jacob down, who looked frozen in shock with the empty cup in his hand. "Jacob, what are you doing?" Kai yelled as well, holding back a smirk. Jacob was at a loss for words, still comprehending what had just happened. His eyes were wide with terror as he stared at Lydia. Despite their checkers game being interrupted, Ariel giggled, watching the calamitous situation unfold. Pointing his finger at Kai, he screeched, "It was him! He threw the water at you!" With an incredulous look, he turned to his older sister and pointed at the water stains on his clothing, same as her. Seeing Lydia's eyes go wide for a moment as she stared past him, Kai had a bad feeling. He quickly turned, seeing Ariel, the little traitor, pointing her finger at Kai as well. Quickly hiding her hand behind her back, Ariel giggled. "Little traitor," he muttered. A heavy weight crashed into his back as his older sister jumped on him, putting her arm around him in a light chokehold. "You're dead. You just don't know it yet," she whispered into his ears, letting out an awkward laugh. "Now that you're awake," she glared at him while he tried to look as innocent as possible. "How about we make a deal? Can you watch these two for a few hours?" There was no response besides the tightening of the chokehold. "I'll do your chores for a week," he shot out quickly. "You woke me up for this. 3 weeks and you will clean my room. 2 weeks and your room. Deal." She released him from the chokehold. "Where are you going?" she asked, the anger vanishing from her eyes now, with the promise of no chores for a few weeks. Kai paused and considered what to tell them. "I'll be going to hang out with a friend," he lied. Lydia started laughing. "You're so full of it," she said, seeing through his lie. "Go, go," she waved her hand dismissively. Kai didn't wait a moment longer. He stood up and promptly walked outside without saying goodbye. The first thing that hit him was the smell of fall and baked bread. To his left and right, there were a few other villagers loitering around, either doing their daily tasks or talking to each other. He was relieved when he didn't see his mother. Since it was the village's free day for most of the residents, his mother was likely talking to Shelley's parents at their home, probably conspiring together about Shelley and him getting married. As best friends, they always wanted their kids to marry, especially considering Kai and Shelley happened to be the same age. Which was a terrible idea in Kai's opinion, because she was a child, and in his mind, he was an adult, despite possessing the body of a child himself. Shelley was a fun girl to play games and pass the time with other than his family, but he had no desire or intentions for her. He just hoped teenage hormones didn't mess with him later. He was going to have to ask his father for help because his mother didn't know when to give up. Sighing to himself, Kai walked down the path leading in the opposite direction from where his mother might be. She always knew where he was in the house, likely because of one of her abilities, so the further he stayed away from her right now, the better chance he had of sneaking out of the village successfully. Kitsune village was surrounded by a tall wooden wall made from the trees of the region. Covering the walls were glyphs and runes flashing occasionally in a pale blue light as if pulsing. Kai had not been knowledgeable about enchantments in his previous life, so he had no idea what their function was outside of using the Identify spell. Logically, he assumed there were strengthening and other resistant enchantments in case something ever did attack the walls, and maybe some kind of detection or alarm enchantments for trespassers or children who escaped. His stomach dropped thinking how his mother would react if she found out he went outside the walls. She was great, but sometimes a little too overprotective. With only a few monsters in the area, it was more likely the walls were there to keep children from wandering outside of the village, which they definitely did, because they were higher than he felt comfortable scaling in his present body. Beyond the village 100 feet past the walls, the grey mists began. The seemingly corporeal mass of mists covered the entire region of forests and mountains, called the illusionary misty region, located between a part of the Heart Empire and the Ashbourne Kingdom. Despite the village being in the middle of the region, none of the mists ever entered the village. An invisible dome surrounded the village, protecting it and ensuring the mists never entered anywhere within 100 feet of it. His father claimed the mists seemed to have special powers that obscured the senses and detection powers. Residents of Kitsune village were less affected by the mists than those who would intrude in its domain. Even with the effects of the mist being lessened for the villagers, it was still easy to get lost. Navigation would be difficult without knowing which references to look for when traveling through the illusionary misty region forests and mountain landscapes, which led to certain villagers having the role of guides for the village. The village had a population of nearly 1,000 people. Because magic extended life expectancy, the number of children was greatly outnumbered when compared to adults in the village. It only took a mere 16 years for a person to grow from birth to an adult, whereas once you were 16, that person would be considered an adult for the next 100 years or longer until they died. While most children who became adults would stay in the village, some would leave never to be seen again. On the other hand, it was also extremely rare for people to move into the village. The last person to do so was his father 18 years ago. Kai didn't completely understand, as he wasn't made aware of the reasons, but Kitsune village was hidden away from the public, so there were never any visitors or delegations from the surrounding cities and countries. The village was generally self-sufficient, acquiring almost everything they needed from the land and monsters in the area. If there was a need for any item they didn't have, the closest town or city was only a day. An example was the cinnamon used for Kai's birthday meals, which was only found in the capital of the Ashbourne Kingdom. Everyone worked to contribute to the well-being of the village and all the villagers. Kai's grandfather, his mother's father, was the current chief of the village, and as such oversaw all decisions when it came to the safety and prosperity of the village. Turning left onto the main path, Kai walked quickly on the central path, leading from one exit of the village to the other. Along the main path was where all the production and administration buildings stood. Kai passed by the Long Hall, the longest building in the village, where everyone came together for special occasions. Every building was made of wood throughout the village, which included their homes. Food was the most prominent and sacred resource in the village. The amount eaten daily was nothing short of crazy for a village of its size. Their farms and livestock pens made up over 80% of the village land inside the walls. If it wasn't for the plant or farm mages, it's quite possible their entire stock of food supply would be devoured within a week. Sometimes it seemed like the few hundred foxes ate more than the humans. Passing by the enchanter's slanted wooden roof was one of the many foxes in the village. From a glance, Kai couldn't tell who it was. Rather than stick to one family, most of the foxes moved around all the time, making it difficult to keep track of who was who. Strangely, there was no set house or building for the foxes to live in. It was just accepted they would stay wherever they wanted. He walked down the path with faux confidence, passing the only blacksmith in the village when a deep voice bellowed, "Kai!" Turning to where the voice originated, he saw a dark mountain of a man crouching underneath a doorframe as he left the smithy's building. "Uncle Xavier," he said, and nodded to the large human. Sleeping around his huge shoulders was a grey-coated fox, seemingly undisturbed by the conversation or noise from his workplace. "Where do you think you're going, son?" "There is nothing that way except the gate out," Xavier stated. "Oh, I'm going to get flowers for Mother," Kai lied, using his prepared line. He followed it up by giving Xavier a winning smile. He felt bad about lying so often today, but he really wanted to see the outside of the village. "Does your mother know you're going to get flowers? Especially when I know there are plenty of flowers inside of the village you could grab." Xavier gave Kai a look of, "I know what you're doing," with his arms crossed over his chest. Feeling scrutinized, Kai remained firm and kept the smile going. "I'll come with—" Xavier paused as if interrupted. After a few seconds, he shook his head. "Go grab your flowers, but don't go past the mist boundary," Xavier said, turning around to head back inside the smithy. Furrowing his brows, Kai was confused before he shook his head, continuing towards the gate. "There is no way Xavier would let me outside the village unsupervised. What just happened?" He spied around looking for any clues as to what was going on. There was nothing. After a short half-minute, he arrived at the boundary of the village's west gate, which faced the Heart Empire. The last obstacle to his adventure would have been the guards stationed at the gate. Gazing around, he spied nobody near or at the gate, leaving it completely unattended and empty. What the heck is going on today? The gate was open with not a soul around. Very suspicious. The watchtower next to the gate was always supposed to have 2 people stationed at all times, but it was strangely vacant. Kai wasn't a fool. With the guards being vacant and Xavier letting him proceed unsupervised, it was as if he was being granted permission. There were too many coincidences. All his mental preparation and lies prepared had apparently been for naught. He admitted that it was a foolish and reckless idea to go outside the walls unsupervised, but he hadn't planned to go very far, merely peek his head into the cloudy mist. Fortuitously, there would be no better time than this, but Kai was becoming nervous that something else was going on that he hadn't been told about. "It's not like I'll go too far." Nodding to himself, he crossed the boundary of the open gate. He knew children were not allowed outside the village gates without adult supervision, though that didn't stop them from trying. It was a common challenge amongst the children to venture outside the walls unsupervised and run into the mists and back out. While Kai was technically a child in body, not in mind, he didn't care for the challenge. His only goal was to see the insides of the mists and then come back out, purely for his own curiosity. In 100 feet, a thick wall of obscure grey mist would begin. It blocked all vision through, but would allow passage. Turning his head, he looked at the walls from the outside for the first time since he had been reborn. There was nothing notable about them, no runes or glyphs appeared on them from this side. If anything, they seemed like weak walls made of shoddy, rotting wood. Metallic banging echoed from inside the village. Xavier had returned to his smithing, pounding his hammer down on whatever his current project was now. Reaching down, he picked a random flower and put it in his pocket to set up his alibi in case his mother found out. Too curious to stop, he continued towards the mists. The corporeal mists seemed solid as it shot up in a vertical wall until it domed overhead. He knew he shouldn't, but he only wanted to see what was inside. After growing up the last 8 years around the mists, his curiosity had peaked. Besides, he had prepared for this moment. Waving the tips of his fingers through the mists, he felt nothing. The mists didn't even move. There was no reaction or sensation. It was as if it didn't even exist. Pulling his hand back, it was normal. The response had been a little anticlimactic. Taking one step forward, he stood just a few inches from the mist. A prickling feeling traveled down Kai's neck suddenly. The sensation of being watched overwhelmed him. Someone was gazing at him from behind, coming from the village. He was familiar with this sensation. As one of the strongest humans in the past, he had been under scrutiny and observation from people, whether they be hidden or in plain sight. He quickly turned his head, looking back, but could see no one in his clear line of sight. Whoever was watching wasn't giving malicious vibes, but rather feelings of curiosity. Shifting back to the mists, he could see nothing in there besides hills, trees, and grass. Tightening his fists, he gathered his courage, taking one last step into the mists. Chapter 5: The Illusionary Misty Forest. There was no sound inside the mists. No insects, wind, or animals could be heard. Gone was the ringing from the blacksmith he heard just a moment ago. It was as if someone had completely muted all outside sounds. The only sound Kai could hear was his own heartbeat. The pounding increased every second he stood there. It was almost as if time was frozen inside the mists for everything except him. It had the look of an ordinary forest, except for muted colors of greens and browns. He immediately noticed the forest didn't have that rich vibrancy in color he had seen in previous ones. It was as if the mists were dimming everything. The further he looked, the denser the mists became until eventually he wasn't able to see through it, just like when he had been on the outside of it. It limits my visibility inside too. It wasn't just the sight and sounds that were muted, but the smell too. This is way too eerie. Unnatural even. I've seen enough. His already rapid heart rate shot up. The village was gone. All he saw was more forest until the mists obscured his vision. What the... Shifting his head quickly, he was surrounded by grass, bushes, and trees. I don't understand. The village should be right there. His heart rate shot up. He didn't move from his spot. Turning in circles, he couldn't see any indicators of his village or life. The village, which should have been only 100 feet behind him, was now gone. It was as if taking that one step into the mists had transported him into the middle of the mist-filled forest. None of the other children had ever said anything about this sort of thing happening. A chill ran down his back. His instinct wanted him to yell, but his rational mind took over, saying that making noise in the disturbingly silent forest would be bad. He laid his hand against his chest and willed his heart rate to slow in an attempt not to panic. I have two options. I can stay here until an adult finds me or look for a way out. After thinking about it for a minute, he decided he would do a circle around his current position in the hopes he would be able to see a way out or any hints about getting back home. Marking the nearest tree with the knife his grandfather gave him for his birthday, he started in the direction that should have been where the village was. Everything was silent except for the crunch of his footsteps as he walked across the grass. The trees towered above him with trunks larger than his body. Raising his head, he couldn't see any leaves, as the branches extended higher into the depths of the mists, well past his vision. If it wasn't for the eeriness of the situation, Kai would even think that the forest was serene in a creepy, untouched sort of way. The environment seemed entirely preserved, which was different from what he was used to in his past life, when trees and the ground were always being torn up to make way for progress and buildings. He continued to progress forward, marking an arrow pointing back home on every other tree with his knife. Every crunch of grass under his boots caused him to cringe in the silent forest. After what he estimated to be 20 meters, he turned back and looked at the original tree he marked. It was partially visible in the thick mist. Seems like a good place to start circling. After another minute of walking, Kai began to feel eyes on his back again. Someone or thing was watching him. Shifting his eyes left to right, he caught movement vanishing into the mists. He hoped it wasn't his eyes playing tricks on him. A shiver of fear sped down his back, thinking something was lurking beyond his field of vision, watching him. He backed up, knife at the ready as his eyes kept shifting. Kai froze when he realized something wasn't right. The mark he had just made on the tree 15 seconds prior was gone. The tree appeared unblemished, as if he had never marked it. Looking over to the previous tree he had marked, his eyes widened when he noticed that Mark was missing as well. His body went cold. Even with all his past life experience fighting monsters and exploring new lands, Kai was beginning to panic. Something was going on, and he wasn't equipped or prepared to deal with it. No one told me about any of this. As if to further incite panic and fear, a high-pitched screech cried out from an unknown location. Kai's heart hammered in his chest. His grip around the knife was growing clammy. The screeching stopped, instantly silenced, but now he could hear multiple crunching sounds coming from inside the mists. Something was moving and growing slightly louder the more time passed. Putting his back to a tree, he looked around, seeing nothing. Kai was frozen with indecision. If he moved, whoever was inside the mists would hear where he was. But if he stood still, the thing making the noise might see him as it came closer. Staying silent and still, Kai kept his eyes trained on the mists ahead. After a minute, he finally saw movement. The shadow of a creature appeared. It was still obscured by the mists, but judging by its silhouette, it was large. That was enough for Kai to make his decision. With no other choice, he ran. He kept his eyes trained on the trees as he ran by, looking for the symbols he had carved, but none appeared. He winced with every step he took, as the crunch of his footsteps seemed to echo in the silent forest. The same screech as before resounded in the forest, accompanied by the rapid crunching of footsteps on the stiff grass approaching him. Twisting his head, Kai could see the creature now. It was a screaming forest boar, something the village regularly had for meals, as it was one of the more common creatures in the forest. The beast was twice as large as Kai and had to weigh easily 5 times him. Kai kept turning his head back and forth to make sure he wouldn't run into a tree as he watched the boar quickly gain on him. The distance was shortening with every second. His heart sank when he realized there would be no chance of outrunning it, especially with the body of an 8-year-old without magic. Steeling his resolve, Kai stopped in front of a tree and turned around to face the boar, knowing if he kept running, he would be trampled. Only a few seconds away, the boar was completely revealed. Adrenaline rushed through him as he narrowed his eyes and bent his knees ready to move. I have to time this perfectly, otherwise I might die. Kai's palm felt slick with sweat, his nerves were getting to him. The beast didn't slow down as it approached, either not noticing the tree behind him or not caring. Now! Jumping to his left last second, Kai tried to dodge the incoming beast. Pain exploded in his right foot as the boar clipped it, causing him to go flying through the air. Eyes scrunched in pain, he heard a loud thump, followed by a smaller one. Falling to the ground, he felt the air escape his lungs as he crashed onto the ground, the short grass doing nothing to cushion his fall. "Fuck!" he screamed at the top of his lungs. The pain was overwhelming as he lay there on his back. Gritting his teeth, it was all he could do not to scream out again. Opening his eyes, he could see the boar lay next to the tree, unmoving, except for the gentle rise of its back, as he still breathed. Turning over, he got onto his hands and knees. Even the slightest movement was causing him agony. Putting his good foot under him, he stood. Lightly he placed his injured foot onto the ground. The pressure caused him to stagger and cry out in pain as the pain flared up. His eyes shot to the boar, which was still unconscious. "My knife, where is it?" Scanning around, he noticed the knife lay between him and the boar, only 1 meter away. Shit. Mom is going to ground me forever if I'm able to make it home. Kai grumbled, knowing his mother would punish him by not allowing him to train in the sword for some time. The worst punishment for an aspiring swordsman. Hobbling over a few feet, he bent down and grabbed the knife. Kai's face took on a crestfallen expression as the boar twitched. Its breathing continued to remain steady. Limping towards the boar, Kai winced in anguish every time he brought down his foot. After a minute, he finally made it to the boar. Grabbing onto a tuft of hair, he steadied himself. Even flat on his stomach, the beast was still taller than him. Staring at the creature, it looked so peaceful, unconscious. But he knew otherwise. He had to kill it, or there was a chance it would wake up and attack him before he could hobble away. Sorry, but this is the way of the world. As you tried to kill me, I will not fail in killing you. Kai raised his hands with the knife aimed down and plunged straight into the boar's eye. Its other eye shot open as it began thrashing its head side to side, squealing in a high-pitched noise. Startled, he tightened his grip on the tuft of fur as he threatened to fall. He felt like it would dislocate as he held onto the knife's handle. The boar kept thrashing its head wildly. Kai realized then that his knife was too short to kill the beast through the eye. Pulling it out, he aimed for another soft target. He stabbed down into the side of its neck, drew back, and stabbed again. His hand was slick with blood, making it difficult to hold its grip. Worse, the beast had stood up. Kai tried to hold on, but as the boar began moving, he tried to take a step and ended up coming down on his broken foot. The unexpected pain caused him to lose his grip on his knife. Taking off, the boar began sprinting away, knife still lodged into its neck. After a few seconds, it slowed down and staggered. Letting out a whimper of pain and victory, he watched the boar collapse as its movement stopped completely. Clap, clap. Turning swiftly, he saw a figure standing right behind him. He breathed out a sigh of relief when he recognized the tall figure. "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" Kai gulped, aware he had screwed up. Roy Cineris didn't look a day over 40. With short black hair, a trimmed beard, and piercing grey eyes, he stood with his arms crossed, frowning down at his grandchild. Kai recognized the expression. It was not the kind, caring, grandfatherly face that he usually portrayed, but the face of a stern village leader who was about to give out punishment. Below, sitting at his grandfather's feet, a majestic-looking fox stared at him. Her intelligent golden eyes were filled with displeasure. Fur of crimson red covered most of her body, except underneath where a strip of pristine white fur ran down from the lower mouth to her back legs. Smaller than most of the adult foxes in the village, Akane, the gluttonous, reigned supreme as the current ruler for all foxes residing in the village. Known widely as the one who eats, the unseen stomachs, and his favorite title is She Who Sleeps, lest you disturb her slumber and suffer the consequences. Growing up around the foxes, Kai could figure out their expression immediately now. For some reason, seeing the angry fox at him made him more nervous than the anger of his grandfather. Still sitting on the ground, Kai decided to try a different approach. He gave his grandfather a winning smile. "Look what I was able to do," Kai said, pointing to the dead boar. He would play the innocent child card if it meant avoiding punishment. Akane sauntered up to Kai, quickly doing a 180-degree turn. She smacked him in the face with her fluffy tail. It was a light tap that he guessed was her way of telling him to shut up, but the tail felt so fluffy he didn't really care. In fact, he couldn't help but reach out and pet the fur of the fox down its backside. Stiffening, she remained still unmoving as he continued to pet it, unintentionally falling into a state of relaxation now that he was safe. "Kai," his grandfather said, grabbing his attention, "drink this. We need to get going. Your mother is probably worried. If we don't hurry, she will rally the other villagers to look for you. You've been gone for 30 minutes. Eyes wide in fright at the mention of his mother and 30 minutes, Kai grabbed the vial of red liquid that had appeared from mid-air. Knowing full well the vial hadn't appeared magically from thin air, but instead had come from his grandfather's ring of storage, one of a few in the village. Popping the cork quickly, he chugged the red liquid. Peppermint flooded his mouth, the warmth traveled down his throat and throughout the rest of his body. Within a minute, he felt his broken foot heat up significantly more than the rest of his body. With a crack and a pop, the foot snapped back together, prompting him to swear aloud. His foot continued to pulse and itch until a few minutes later when healing effects had worn off. Standing, he gingerly pressed his foot onto the ground, making sure it was back to normal. There was no longer any pain, only tenderness. "Let's go," his grandfather simply said as he moved past him, Akane trotting at his side. Kai remained silent as he walked, his thoughts back to what had just happened. He had been stupid and reckless to come into the mists alone and without magic. He knew that even though the mists were regularly patrolled, it didn't mean there weren't animals or monsters that wouldn't attack him. What was most strange was he hadn't gone more than 1 meter into the mists, or so he thought. Even the markings he made had vanished from the trees. What should have been a fast and easy matter turned into something dangerous. There was no reasonable explanation except some nefarious magic at play. His grandfather and Akane remained quiet as well, simply glancing at him as he walked between them. Freezing in her tracks, Akane stopped without warning. A second later, all kinds of animals and monsters began screaming throughout the forest. Following those cries, the ground began shaking. Nearly losing his balance, Kai grabbed onto his grandfather's sleeve. As quickly as it had started, the shaking ceased along with the noise, the misty forests returning to silence once more. "It's been happening more and more lately," his grandfather mused aloud. There was another pause in conversation as they continued their walking. "I'm sorry," Kai said, breaking the silence. With a sigh, his grandfather spoke. "You have good instincts, Kai. You didn't even flinch or hesitate to kill it. I mean, you should have cut its throat to begin with, but it was a good try. I assumed I was going to have to save you, but you were smart to set a trap for the boar. It was all I could do. I thought I was going to die. I mean, I even broke my foot. If that boar didn't knock itself out, I really might have died." Kai went silent, thinking how lucky he had been. His grandfather smiled brightly. "Of all my grandchildren, you have always been the one to make me the proudest. Your intelligence and craftiness are unmatched by those your age. But you should have come to me if you wanted to see inside the mists. I'd ought to smack your backside for going in unsupervised if I wasn't sure your mother was already going to do it." Kai gulped, knowing he was doomed if his mother found out. He felt phantom pain on his backside already. His grandfather gave him a knowing look. "I won't tell her." Kai beamed and quickly gave his grandfather a hug. "But you have to promise me you will not enter the forest again unless you're with an adult, a fox, or in the third realm. Although we do our best to cull them, there are many stronger monsters living in the mists." Kai did the only thing he could to escape punishment. He agreed. The fox remained silent as they walked, nodding away at their conversation as if she understood it. "What level was it?" Kai asked. He was practically skipping now that he learned there would be no punishment. "Foundation, level 27. Not bad for an 8-year-old mortal." His grandfather gave him a smirk. "Only level 27, Kai muttered to himself. "I thought it would be stronger with how it shook the tree." Silence lapsed again as they continued their trek through the murky mists. Yawning, Kai was growing tired. The battle had taken a lot out of his immature body. "Grandpa, how did you know I was out here?" Kai asked with interest. He guessed that the person watching him now had been his grandfather the entire time. "It's not like you were being stealthy. You just walked right out of the village. Even the village watchtower guards saw you leave." "What?" "There were no watchtower guards there when I was leaving," Kai admitted. "They were there," his grandfather responded mysteriously. Chapter 6. Sword Training. Kai felt his arm and hand going numb as he swatted back blow after blow with his sword. The sword grew heavier in his hand. His father had not moved from his initial position even when he attempted to attack his backside. Shifting his foot, he prepared to lunge. Seeing the twinkle in his father's eyes, he hesitated, knowing any maneuver he would make to be futile. Despite never talking about it, he guessed his father was in an even higher realm of magic than Kai had been in his first life. Any maneuver he could think of would be stopped or foreseen easily by his skills and stats. Logically, Kai knew that a mortal had no chance against someone in the 5th realm and above, but he was growing frustrated at the lack of progress to show for it. "After 3 years of sword training and I still haven't managed to get a hit. I know I shouldn't be able to, the disparity is too much, but this is really freaking disheartening." He now knew how frustrating it was when dealing with someone so much more powerful than you. Not just frustrating, but demoralizing. Of course, there had been people that had looked down on him when he first unlocked his magic, but he had quickly out-leveled them, no longer putting them in his eyes. Kai focused his eyes on his father's body posture and stance. Octavian's stance was wrong, his body was loose, and his front foot was angled to the side while his left faced ahead. His feet were intentionally misaligned. I know he is giving me an opening, but it doesn't mean shit if I can't find a proper way to take advantage of it. If I fight the conventional way, I will never be able to land a hit on him until I receive my magic and get near his level. Wait, maybe that's the answer, not to fight in the traditional approach, but do something unexpected. His father stood unmoving, while Kai pondered what to do next. Tightening his fist around the handle of the wooden sword, Kai exhaled. His heartbeat was fast, but not overly so, and even though he had been fighting for half an hour, his breathing was controlled. Stupid breathing techniques actually worked, he thought. Pushing off the ground with his feet, he lunged forwards toward his father. With 2 hands on the handle, a sharp whack rang out as the 2 wooden swords collided with each other in an X pattern. He could see the boredom in his father's eyes, mocking him. Taking a step forward, he planted his foot onto his father's front foot. Knowing he would only have a second, he dropped his left hand from the handle, ripping the knife at his waist from its sheath before slashing out towards his father's lower stomach, trying to slice across it. He felt the knife halt completely, his father's free hand grabbing it at the blade. No blood could be seen as he held it immobile like an unmovable boulder. His shoulders slumped in defeat. It was obvious he had been thoroughly beaten. The difference in strength and speed was too much for him. Looking up, he could see an annoying smirk on his father's face. "Let's take a seat on that log." Octavian pointed to a fallen tree trunk he had sliced down earlier in one swing earlier. The mists were settled all around, no different than usual. All of their training sessions took place out in the isolated mists near the town beginning a year ago. When Kai asked why they didn't just train inside the village, the only response he received was, "Your mother may begrudgingly accept your training, but do you really think she wants to see it? I'd have to sleep on the couch every time your mother saw me lightly tap your brother during our spars." The mist still unsettled him to this day. He couldn't help but feel like an intruder when he was traveling through them. The memory of that day 3 years ago still gave him pause. Thankfully, nothing like that had happened since. "Now tell me why you chose that way to attack." Kai sighed. "It's obvious there was nothing I could do against you. You are stronger and better in every aspect, and standard fighting wasn't working. The only chance I had was to pull something underhanded." "Not that it worked," he mumbled that last part. "I was pretty impressed," his father claimed. Perking up, Kai felt his spirits lifted. "Until your eyes gave you away," his father finished. And there it is. Kai remained silent, resisting the urge to hit his father, who was still smirking at his distress. In truth, Kai was dejected. It seems impossible. Is there any way to close the gap? Noticing his son in deep thought, Octavian interrupted. "Kai, you're smart enough to know that true combat isn't as honorable as what we have been doing here. True combat is chaotic and fierce. Only by training can we lay the foundation of preparing you for the upcoming chaos of battle. When you finally receive your magic, you're going to have to find your own style and incorporate it into your swordplay or vice versa. You have intellect, cunning, and determination. Although your swordplay is rough, you have something many others don't have, which is honed battle instincts. Hey, are you listening?" Octavian lightly smacked Kai in the back with his palm. "It's only been 3 years since we started training. You need to relax and continue honing the basics." "Gods, you're impatient." Kai knew he was trying to rush ahead. He desperately wanted to catch up to the skills those who had survived over 1,000 years would have developed and accumulated. In his first life, he had been a blood mage, controlling his blood and that of his enemies in battle. In those last moments of life, he had squared off against Lucian with a sword, despite never properly training with one before. But it was all his resources would allow. It was easy enough to hack and slash, but true weapon mastery took more finesse and control, he was learning. His father was training him in the basics, but it wasn't enough. He wanted more. Letting out a groan, he rubbed his forehead. Turning to his father, Kai couldn't help but wonder about his father's childhood. The man always changed the subject or seemed reserved to talk about it. "Dad, you know better than me how dangerous these worlds are. I need you to trust me when I say that it is important that I learn to be the best fighter possible. Would you please train me harder? I don't feel like I'm making enough progress." "Son, you're too serious. You're 11. You should be enjoying your life with your friends." He coughed once. "Friend? not sweating away working with your old man. I mean, I know you're not the most social person, but you should be doing something else, like kickball or playing pranks, annoying your mother, not training until you're depressed or broken. I'll try to relax. Kai gave him a look that they both knew he was not being truthful. But what about you? Were you training when you were my age? He asked. He gave his father an unblinking stare, hoping to finally get a kernel of truth from him about his mysterious past. Breaking eye contact, Kai's father looked away, instead of focusing on the ground in front of him. He seemed uncomfortable. Yes. Kai remained unflinching in his stare, waiting for his father to continue. You have to remember, I'm not originally from this village. The place my family grew up is vastly different than this peaceful little hidden village. The planet Eris on which we reside is fairly safe by Myriad of Worlds standards, if you can believe that. There are a few monsters that could destroy a city or two in mere minutes, but they are few and far between on Eris. And they generally stay in their own territory, assuming no one is stupid enough to bother them. The planet I grew on is Titan Prime. By now you know the central planet, which all others orbit, including the 3 suns. Once you finally leave this misty region that blocks the sky, you will see the incredible sight of the planets visible to the naked eye. So close that even if you stretch your hand out in front of your face, you wouldn't even be able to cover up some of them completely. It's truly awe-inspiring. Titan Prime is one of the most dangerous planets in the Myriad of Worlds. I don't know the exact difference in size, but it is likely thousands of times larger than this planet. Monsters that could destroy cities here are as common as muck there, and they are everywhere. Even throughout the long history of the Myriad of Worlds, the humanoid races struggled to gain ground on Titan Prime. It was expected that I would train and grow strong enough to face whatever would threaten our sanctuary there. Finishing, Octavian had his hands wrung together, squeezing tightly, clearly recalling some bad memories. The two remained silent for a few minutes, staring into the mists. "But you're here now," Kai stated. All he received was a nod, his father unwilling to expand. "Thank you for finally telling me a little about your life before you came to Eris. But seriously, I have so many questions about Titan Prime. It had been the planet everyone saw in his past life because it dominated the sky so often. It had always remained a mystery to him and humanity during those beginning years in the Myriad of Worlds." Letting out a small laugh, Octavian smiled at his son's inquisitiveness, breaking the tension. "Let's make a deal. I'll tell you a little about Titan Prime, but I trust that our conversation today will have to stay between us. Your mother and grandfather are the only two who know the details of my situation before Eris." Kai nodded in response. To his side, he noticed Sigma was paying attention to them, no longer napping while they fought. Over the last 3 years, the fox had become a constant companion to Kai and his father's outings. Strangely enough, he didn't allow anyone to touch him, reminding Kai of an ill-tempered cat hissing at the hand that feeds. "All right, those questions will have to wait for now. It's my turn to quiz you," Octavian said while stretching his arms wide. Growing slightly nervous, Kai could only nod his head, as it was only fair since his father was taking the time to help him train. "What do you want to get out of sword training?" Octavian asked simply. "I want to learn to use the sword." Kai cocked his head while answering the question awkwardly. "Wasn't it obvious?" "That's not what I meant. I want to know what your purpose is in learning the sword. Do you want to fight humanoids, monsters, or perhaps both? To be the greatest swordsman ever? Your answer may impact what I teach you going forwards." "I asked your brother this question, and you know what he told me? He said he wanted to be like me." A cute answer, but not one with a lot of forethought. "You're different, Kai. You've always been more mature than your siblings. Granted, you have your moments where you do act your age, but there has always been, how do I say this, a certain air about you. You always have seemed to know what you want even as an infant. So I'll ask again, what is your purpose in learning the sword?" Kai thought to himself for a minute. His brows furrowed as his mind kept wandering to revenge and the fact that if he had been better trained using a sword in those final moments, if it would have made a difference. Could he have lived? Could he have at least killed Lucian too? Probably not. The feelings of being betrayed still haunted him to this day. His new family had broken down the walls he built to try and protect himself. Kai realized that even if he didn't want to, he was always going to have to give a little trust, whether it be to someone he was fighting with or a stranger. Trust was essential for a society to operate, otherwise it would be anarchy. But that didn't mean he couldn't be ready for trouble. I want to be ready for any situation. If monsters or enemies come at me, I'll be able to defend myself and fight them. If my opponent has weapons training, I can counter them with my knowledge and experience. If someone wrongs me, I'll be able to right the situation, whether it be through killing them or simply defeating them. Kai unconsciously squeezed his fists, anger flooding him as he thought about one person in particular again. Octavian peered at his son, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Has someone done something to you, son?" Octavian questioned. Freezing for a second, Kai quickly shook his back and forth quickly. "No, no one has done anything to me," Kai lied. His fists unclenched, but the anger was still there. With a final look, Octavian stood up with a sigh. "Fine, I'll leave it at that for now, but you know you can always come to talk to me, son. I'll always be available to listen, and if you so wish, advise." Kai just nodded mutely. There was no way Kai could ever tell his family, remembering his past life and his ongoing one-sided feud with Lucian, who probably thought he was dead. Not only would they think him crazy, but even if they did believe him, their relationship with him would change forever. Kai had grown to love his new family. They were kind and caring. He was scared to learn what their reaction would be if they learned of his past life. It would break his heart like the time he learned of Lucian's betrayal if they chose not to accept him anymore after learning the truth. There was nothing good that could come out of his family knowing. So he would say nothing. "Kai, Kai," Octavian said, while waving a hand in Kai's face, trying to gain his attention. Kai looked up to see his father's concerned face. Hearing a crunching on the grass nearby, he turned to see a small, screaming forest boar walking towards them. Oddly, the matriarch fox Akane was standing on its backside without a care in the world. "What is she doing?" He snickered a little at the odd sight. "I was going to have you fight that, but I think we should do that on a different day when you can focus better. You need to have a clear mind and not get distracted by your thoughts. What if I didn't give you a warning and the enemy approached you while spaced out?" "Sorry, you're right. I promise I'll do better," Kai responded, standing up, gripping the wooden sword. "I want to try and fight it. Please." Octavian stared at his son's face, dipping his head when he saw the seriousness in it. He then noticed his dilemma. It wouldn't be much of a fight if he was whacking the boar with a wooden stick. To his relief, his father noticed his plight. A ball of polished silver metal appeared in front of them. Using whatever magic powers he possessed, the ball of metal deformed, quickly turning into floating liquid metal. Within a second, it began taking shape into a short sword. Taking his father's cue, Kai walked up and placed his hand on the grip. Warmth radiated in his hand, the kind of warmth he'd expect from a newly forged sword or fresh bread. The grip even had finger indents, perfectly sized for his hand. Spinning around in circular motions, he got a feel for its maneuverability and weight. Its balance is incredible, or I think it is at least. He hadn't actually gotten to use a real sword yet, being stuck using a wooden sword for the last 3 years, sadly. Kai stared in amazement at his father, who had created this phenomenal sword for him in mere seconds. To create such a sword so quickly, his father had to have spent much of his time around swords. Marching up to boar, Kai stopped at 5 meters away. He took a stance with his knees slightly bent, ready to react to the boar. Nodding his head, he signaled he was ready to start. Akane hopped off the boar's back and padded over to Sigma, who lowered his head to the female fox in a submissive greeting. Strangely, the boar stood frozen, as if in a daze. Its eyes began refocusing, as if it had just woken up. After shaking its head side to side, it suddenly noticed Kai in front of it. The beast gave a high-pitched yowl as it lowered its tiny tusks before charging straight for Kai. Clearing his mind of all present distractions, Kai's eyes remained focused on the boar, while attempting to keep the rest of his senses open to his surroundings in case his father and the fox tried to trip him. Kai noticed it appeared smaller than the one he had fought previously 3 years ago, meaning it was likely younger and at a lower level. It should be an easier fight, but last time he had won by luck instead of skill. The wild boar began its charge without any fanfare, heading straight for Kai. Recalling the last boar had made an entire tree shake, even at the expense of knocking itself out, Kai chose to evade instead of meeting it straight on. At the last possible second, Kai dodged to the left, his sword slashing out at its front leg. He felt his hand and sword shake as metal met bone, causing him to nearly lose his grip. With a whine, the boar collapsed to the ground, sliding a few meters. Without pausing, Kai charged at the boar, lunging towards the back leg of the downed beast. Blood splattered as he slashed across its thigh. Injured, the boar let out a bellow. Infused with magic, the screech cut through the air, Kai's eyes ringing. Dropping his sword, Kai closed his eyes as he covered his ears with his hands in an attempt to block out the sound. It muted it partly, but the ringing persisted. As soon as the sound stopped a few seconds later, he opened his eyes. Removing his hands from his ears, grabbed at the sword, only to find the once hard handle now slick with wetness. Turning his hands over, he noticed blood on his palms, likely blood that had come from his ears. Not much more than a trickle, but enough to give him pause. A stick cracking through the ringing noise caused his head to shoot up. The boar had begun to limp away, not even bothering to use its front leg that Kai had cut first. Kai walked slowly to the even slower boar. While its back was still turned, he slashed down at the same spot on its opposite back leg, slicing into something hard. Collapsing, the boar let out a soft, whiny squeal. He felt pity for the beast as it lay there, lame from its injuries. It had done nothing but defend itself in its own territory. Kai knew that any pity was wasted. The laws of the world were simple. Be strong or die. And this boar would be his second stepping stone in this life to his path of growth and strength. Clutching the sword with both hands, Kai drove it into the side of the barely breathing beast. There was a slight resistance before it pierced the rest of the way through to its brain, the breathing quieting immediately. Standing still, Kai breathed deeply, his ears still rung with a high pitch, a minor annoyance in the background now. Feeling a hand on his shoulder, he heard the muffled voice of his father. "You did well." Chapter 7. The Next Chief. Kai sat resting his back against one of the trees inside the village. In his hands was a book narrating human expansion into the vast Myriad of Worlds. If he was being honest, it was a bit dry. The topics were very to the point, but the central idea was that while humans were the newest addition to the Myriad of Worlds, they had been very successful in their integration and could be seen on many planets at present times. Although humans had made enemies of a few species, of which goblins were chief among them. Kai was growing frustrated. He felt that his preparation for the future was too slow. Sometimes it felt like all his intentions were being limited by both resources and his mother. Already he had gone through most of the books inside the village, even borrowing from the personal collection of the other villagers. His mother, on the other hand, seemed determined to undermine his efforts to grow and prepare. He was only allowed to train a few hours a day with the sword. And worst of all, she wouldn't let him take up an apprenticeship with other members of the community unless he gave up his sword training time. He groaned at the thought of all the wasted time, but she was absolutely determined to make him live the life of a normal child. And regrettably, he could only listen to her as he played the part of a child. To his side, Shelley huffed and was fidgeting. It was obvious she was growing more irritated by the minute, distracting him from finishing his book. Folding the tip of the page, he closed the book. Letting out a sigh, he asked, "What is it?" "You promised we could spend time together." She crossed her arms, standing above him now, as she paced back and forth. "What do you call what we've been doing?" he asked. Had they not been sitting at the tree spending time together for the last 30 minutes? "That's not what I mean, and you know it." "Gods, I know your mother said you were playing hard to get. But don't make a girl work too hard." She gave him a single arching eyebrow. He choked on his saliva. Coughing and pounding his chest, he cleared his throat. "You shouldn't listen to my mom. She suffers from a deplorable case of meddling." Kai watched her fidget with her shirt sleeve. Every few seconds, her eyes would find his, only to shift back down. "What is it?" he questioned. "Are you really going to leave?" "Yes. A month after I turn 16 and receive my magic, the new term at the Ashbourne Academy will begin. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. Gazing at her feet, she said, "But I don't want you to leave." Kai sighed once more. Standing up, he placed his hands on Shelley's shoulders. He stared into her eyes with his most serious expression. "Shelley, it isn't going to happen. I'm not going to stay in this village. I'm your friend, and I want you to find happiness. But it's just not going to be with me." He spoke clearly and slowly, hoping the words would finally sink in. Even more, tears welled up in her eyes before she pulled away, crying loudly as she ran down the small hill and out of sight. Kai should have felt guilty for making her cry once again, but if he was being honest, he felt relief. Sitting back, he was ready to resume reading his book, now that all present distractions were gone. Shit. I really should have handled that better. I don't know what else to do besides being blunt. He took a deep breath. Even he was allowed to get irritated once in a while, but thinking back, he had definitely been too harsh. The only thing he could do was apologize and make it up to her later. Not even 5 minutes later, he heard someone creeping up on him from behind. "Ari," he mused aloud. The sound paused for a second before he heard, "Not fair. How did you know?" His youngest sister came around the tree, her arms crossed and face pouting. Looking down beyond his book, he could see his sister's foot tapping the ground. She was impatiently waiting for something as he tried to continue his reading. "What is it, Squirt?" he asked, calling her by her least favorite nickname as he flipped to the next page. She merely stood there, silent as he read. After another page's worth of awkward silence, he looked up. His little sister had a wide grin on her face, like she found something utterly hilarious. "What?" "You're in trouble," she said in a sing-song voice.
No, man.
His brows furrowed while he thought of what he could have done to be in trouble. His head dropped when he realized. "Shelley," he stated. It felt like an anvil had dropped on his head, lowering it even more. He didn't want to look up. He knew his little sister had the widest grin on her face. At 8 years old, she was becoming quite a troublemaker. "Yup, Shelley." He could hear the laughter in her voice. "After you so brutally and ungracefully rejected Shelley, the poor thing ran home crying. Mom, of course, found out, and boy oh boy, is she upset with you." Kai let out a defeated sigh. "I didn't raise such a rude, inconsiderate child," Ariel mimicked their mother's voice. Kai felt a shiver run down his back. Although he knew she wouldn't actively punish him for turning down Shelley, she always found little ways to get back at him for upsetting the girl. His chores seemed to increase ever so slightly, or the dessert seemed smaller than everyone else's for a week. A little underhanded, but that was the worst she ever did. She loved Kai and respected his decision not to marry Shelley, despite her wishes for her son. It still didn't stop her from trying occasionally. Kai felt kind of bad for Shelley. She was a nice girl, but he couldn't help feeling like she was being manipulated by their parents. He understood their parents' concern. Shelley was an innocent girl with eyes in the clouds. She didn't know anything about the world outside their hidden village, and as far as he knew, didn't have aspirations of leaving. There were others in the village she could marry, but she seemed to have her sights focused on him. He hoped as she grew older, that would change. Perhaps one day she would leave and meet someone. After all, his mother had left the village for some years and had met her husband, their father, somewhere in the Ashbourne kingdom before moving back home. He closed his book shut. "Has nothing to do with me." He squeezed his eyes. "Maybe I'll try harder to get her interested in Jacob. They seem like a good match." "Let's go, Ari." Kai slipped the book into his pocket. Standing up, he stretched his back and arms. He felt the blessed crack and popping of his bones in his old age of 13. "Old man," he heard his sister snicker. He shot her a glare before holding out his hand expectantly. Within a second, Ariel's tiny hand gripped his tightly. They walked down the hill, past the fields of vegetables and fruits. Instead of heading home to be stared down by his mother, Kai pulled his sister the opposite way, hoping his mother would forget by the time when he arrived home. "How's your training going?" Kai asked, interrupting the tune she was humming to herself. Much like everyone in his family, she was granted a special present when she turned 8 years old. That present remained a secret to everyone except their parents. All he and his other siblings knew was she was getting trained by their mother. In what? He had no idea. To his eyes, his mother was an everyday housewife. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but she was a little sketchy on the details of what she used to do before she met their father. Somehow his sister knew and was training to do something similar. Good, Ariel responded as evenly as she could. She was clearly trying to keep the emotion out of her voice, but Kai caught a little inflection in her voice. Turning to her, she was obviously trying not to make eye contact. She was hiding something. Kai sighed, choosing not to pursue it. She would tell him when she was ready. Letting go of her hand, he ruffled her hair, causing it to stick up in places. Kai matched his sister step for step through the village. The village reminded him of his past life, where the people banded together to make humanity stronger. It was something of a necessity back then, during those very brutal times. Kitsune Village had a very rural feel to it and even looked like it. But Kai knew that looks were deceptive. The withdrawn and peaceful-natured village hadn't stagnated at all. No, it had been the opposite. For instance, they had working toilets. Something the people in his first life raved about. They always complained about how much they missed toilets and toilet paper. It was a marvel Kai had never known, but now couldn't live without. They had entered the manufacturing area of the village, where everyone worked to produce goods for their fellow villagers. This is where the blacksmith, enchanters, infirmary, and other necessities of life were stationed. On the opposite side was the residential area, where his house was located and where his mother was probably waiting. Kai walked with a direction in mind. As they approached a small building, his sister bolted forwards, slamming the door open as she continued inside. Kai shook his head as she vanished from sight. Following suit, he crossed the threshold into the small building. Instead of the small, cramped space a person might expect from looking from the outside, the inside was massive, comparable to the great hall where the entire village gathered to eat on special occasions. His sister grinned seeing him enter. Kai put his index finger over his mouth, signaling for her to be quiet, then nodded his head up. Together the two walked towards a group of adults conversing around a large square table. On the way, Kai spied Akane sleeping soundly. She was facing a lit fireplace while laying on a luxurious-looking chair. Kai was stunned when his sister ran over to the sleeping fox and grabbed her. She hoisted the equally shocked fox up, holding her against her front, much like a doll. Akane's body from head to tail was about a third of his 8-year-old sister, proving the fox to be quite small. Kai covered his mouth as he began silently laughing, but stopped the moment Akane's eyes shifted onto him. Her brow twitched as she narrowed her slitted eyes at him. Holding his hands up, Kai turned away before Akane decided to give a shared punishment to the two for waking her out of her restful slumber. He noticed the group was still talking. His grandfather at the head of the table held up a single finger, silently asking him to wait. He watched his grandfather's eyes shift to his sister before they grew large with concern. Even though the group was only a few meters away, he couldn't hear anything being said. He guessed that one of the adults was manipulating the wind, so no sound traveled beyond a certain point. After a minute, the sound resumed. "We'll meet again, same time next week." The adults began walking out, all ruffling Kai's hair on the way past, making sure it was messier than what he had done to Ariel. He recognized everyone who had attended. They were all leaders in their respective vocations. Even his older sister's enchantment master had attended the meeting. With no one blocking his vision anymore, he saw an accurately scaled model of the entire mountain with the village near the center point. However, in this model, there was no mist to obscure anything. "How can I help my two cute grandchildren?" his grandfather said, drawing his attention away from the diorama. Behind him, he heard the laboring sounds of Ariel's footsteps as she noisily trekked across the wooden floor to them, with Akane swinging side to side, trapped in the arms of her captor. His grandfather's lip curled with silent laughter before he turned his head away when the fox's eyes found him. He coughed into his hand once. "Ariel, dear, would you please put Akane down?" "No thank you, Grandpa. Akane is warm and cuddly," Ariel pouted, tightening her hold on the fox. His grandfather, Roy, made a religious sign with his hands and muttered, "By the 9," before he summoned 2 empty cups. He proceeded to walk over to a crystal container and poured some thick green juice into each. Kai swore he put something extra in his cup. Giving him the cup without the extra stuff, Kai gratefully accepted it. Knocking it back, he felt the cool, refreshing vegetable juice hitting the back of his throat. "So again, to what do I owe the pleasure?" his grandfather asked, sipping on his drink, unlike Kai. "Kai's hiding from Mom," Ariel shouted before Kai could even talk. Choking, his gaze turned on her. She had a wide smile on her face. Akane likewise had a fox-eating grin as she still hung limply in the arms of his betraying sister. "Still hasn't given up yet, I see." He could hear the mirth in his grandfather's voice. "It's not in her vocabulary." "I will talk to her. I know she just wants her children to be safe, but the choice should ultimately be up to you two. Are you sure that leaving this village is what you want?" His grandfather's tone turned surprisingly serious. "I know you have aspirations outside of this place, even this planet. But I would like to offer you an alternative. With your mother refusing to inherit leadership of the village, it must fall to one of her children to take my place in the future. Your older brother is unsuitable, his temperament isn't appropriate for leadership. Lydia wishes to become an enchanter with her whole heart," he shrugged. "Kai, I believe you would be the best choice." Kai's breath caught. What he was being offered was a fantastic opportunity, a safe life, one full of familiarity and comfort. One where he could live on in happiness and grow old. As desirable as that sounded, Kai's very core rejected the idea. He wanted adventure, to enjoy the thrill of battle, even to conquer. Kai was a warrior at heart. Maybe there was a chance he could do something different, but right now he didn't want to. He slowly shook his head. "I'm sorry, it's not what I want to do with my life, grandfather." His grandfather hung his head. "I already knew." "I'll do it, grandfather," came Ariel's squeaky voice from the side. "I will inherit and become the next chief." "Sweetie, what about your training with your mother?" He emphasized the word training, likely aware of what they were doing. "I'll do both." Her tone was completely serious. Kai and his grandfather shared a look. "You're still too young to know what you want. Why don't we discuss this when you unlock your magic and see if you still desire to become the next chief then?" their grandfather placated. "Please," she said. She held Kai's eyes. It was strange seeing his mischievous, clever sister be so serious. "I doubt Jacob wants to stay in the village too." After half a minute, she didn't relent. Kai smiled at her, and in turn she smiled back. He turned to their grandfather. "What's the worst that can happen?" he teased. Ariel scowled. She had apparently been expecting a more positive endorsement. "Your mother is going to give me hell," he sighed. "Okay, starting immediately, you will sit in on all future council meetings, and you will have private studies expanding on topics not taught at that sham we call a school here." He waved Kai away. "Leave us. Your sister and I must discuss some things which you aren't authorized to know." Giving his sister a wink, he left the building and started on his way home to receive judgment. Chapter 8. Magic Unlocked. Shooting out of bed, Kai stretched his arms. He could feel the adrenaline pumping as excitement engulfed him. Today was his 16th birthday. In a matter of minutes or hours, he would unlock his magic element and class, thus leading to his future ascension into the ranks of adulthood and power. More nervous than he ought to be, having already gone through the process once before, Kai padded down to the bathroom to take care of business. Relieved, he walked to the kitchen where his entire family, minus his older brother, waited for him. Their voices stopped the moment he walked in. All their eyes bore into his. Chuckling at their piercing eyes, he said, "Not yet, guys." With a collective sigh, the family began discussing Kai's upcoming magic as they ate their breakfast. "I'll bet 1 week of chores he will unlock ash magic. Mom, Garen, and Lydia are all ash magic users. Ash magic runs strong in our veins. No one has been able to unlock metal magic affinity as Dad has," Ariel pointed out, starting the debate. "I'll take that bet. I don't know if you guys have realized he is kind of weird." "He will definitely have some weird kind of magic," Jacob said. After breakfast finished, the family dispersed, ending the debate, which has been mainly between two main elements of ash versus metal. "Kai, the offer remains. If you want to go over things together when your options appear, let me know. I don't have guard duty today, so I will be available all day to help if needed," offered his father. Stepping up, he gave his father a long hug, tearing up a little at the same time. He was just a tad taller than his father now. "Thank you," he spoke sincerely. A few hours later, Kai found himself sitting by a stream he often used to wash himself or his clothes after training. He was inside the dreary mists. When he began his training years ago, it had been creepy and uncomfortable to be inside the mists. Now he felt calm inside the grey abyss. Most of that was because he knew there was nothing truly dangerous inside. Akane slept by his side as they waited. Practicing his meditation, he closed his eyes and remained still, clearing his mind as he waited for the change to happen. During the next hour, he opened his eyes multiple times, finding it too difficult to sit there and rest. Every few minutes with his eyes closed felt like a few hours. His body and mind were too restless and excited to sit still. Attempting his mediation once again, his eyes shot open. The changes had begun. His body began to feel lighter as it tingled with newfound energy. A hum resonated within him, almost like his body was vibrating. Even his mind felt slightly different, new clarity and possibilities brimming inside. Although the change in general was barely noticeable, he understood that his body and mana had started to merge as one. As he would level up, his body would be able to absorb and combine with more mana, enhancing it as it became more enriched with power. It signaled a new beginning as he officially stepped into the foundation realm of magic. Kai beamed, grinning with pure, unadulterated excitement as a list of magic elements projected into his mind, visible only to him. The list was printed in a language he understood with absolute clarity. Magical affinities available, choose one. Ash, blood, gravity, metal, mist, void. Kai was partially surprised. While he truly had no way of knowing what magic he would have an affinity for, he had suspected his knowledge and heritage would play a big part in it. Ash, blood, and metal were some that he had suspected he would have an affinity. Ash and metal were a part of his family's legacy. His mother's side used ash magic, while his father's family favored metal according to him. Blood magic was obvious. It was the magic he had used before death, and the one of which he was most familiar and knowledgeable. In fact, Kai would have been stunned had blood magic not been on the list. Next up was mist affinity, which Kai had an inkling might show up. It made sense, since he often spent most of his time inside the mists as he trained for the last 8 years. He had studied and acknowledged the mists in that time, growing accustomed to them. What truly surprised Kai was seeing an additional magic affinity for 2 elements he had not foreseen. Void was a dark horse, unknown and dangerous. He knew nothing of void except that the word meant empty. The other unforeseen element was gravity. He knew nothing about gravity magic except that it was extremely rare and potentially powerful. His previous father, Mick, had been a physics professor during his time on Earth for some university named after a color. When coming to the Myriad of Worlds, he studied and documented much of what he discovered about gravity and other phenomena. He would enthusiastically try to teach Kai about gravity and those other subjects as he discovered new data or founded new hypotheses. Tears began unwillingly falling from Kai's face as he thought about his father. The man had done nothing but try and share his passion with his son, only to be rebuffed. Mick might be the very reason why he had gravity magic appearing as an available affinity. Back in the day, it was very rare if someone had 3 affinities available when they unlocked their magic. While this was technically his second time unlocking magic, Kai had 6 affinities to choose from, making it difficult to narrow down his choices. Even his brother Garen only had 2 affinities when he turned 16, ash and water magic, which showed that randomness was also a component to which affinity you would have available. Staring at the list, Kai focused his eyes on blood. Despite his resolution to switch magic elements, his mind and body trembled with familiarity. He knew that even if he were to choose blood magic again, he would have to restart at Foundation Level 1. Magic was produced through the body with the will of the mind. The body acted as a medium that contained the magic inside of it, like a pot filled with water. With his death and rebirth, he was now in a new body, meaning all the progress he had made with his old body was lost. The pot had broken. Only with a new container could he begin anew. Unfortunately, as much as he loved blood magic, it had failed him in his most dire moment. Kai couldn't help but think of a quote Lucian said often: "The body is a vessel on which magic is delivered, the mind its captain, and soul holds the vessel's story." It fit perfectly with his situation, because while he had lost his vessel, his soul remained. Thus, he remembered everything. Mist magic was out. While it had been rare in the past, and even here in the village, he had never heard of anyone powerful using it. He imagined it lacked the overwhelming authority and power he would need. Granted, he could be wrong. To his side, Akane remained silent the entire time. She had initially perked up during the process of his ascension into the Foundation realm, quietly watching him with interest. I've narrowed down my options to ash, gravity, void, and metal magic, each powerful in their own right, but all distinctly different. I think I would be happy with any one of them, but I can only pick one for now, Kai spoke aloud to Akane. Not expecting a response, Kai continued, Ash is like blood magic. It's malleable and has many different advantages. It's an element I've imagined using often over the years, but something about it doesn't feel quite right. I hesitate to say, but it almost feels like fate is pulling me away from Ash, as if that isn't what I'm destined to use. All he received was a snort from Akane as she continued to sit on the ground. With a wry smile, Kai assumed her response meant something like, stop being dumb and pick one already. Although she couldn't communicate beyond yapping and other fox noises, Akane always seemed to understand the context of what was being said. All right, I'll pick one soon, Kai pleaded with the impatient fox. Void is interesting and dangerous enough to be viable, but when I think of what I learned using the sword, I'm not sure how to incorporate void magic into that. Of all the void magic users I've known, they are all mage types. Not that there is anything wrong with that. And that's the style I used to fight with anyways. There is nothing proving that picking a rarer type of magic would guarantee success. In fact, it could be the opposite. With fewer masters in that element, I would be less likely to receive education and training with it. A void mage named Ellen Beckett had managed to reach the same realm as him in the past before his death. He was quite sure he had sensed her on the day he died with all the others, but there had been too much going on to be certain. No, not void. Not for now at least. Metal was a very viable option, one he knew would make his father Octavian happy and proud. It would also fit the style of fighting which he had been training with. As Kai stared between metal and gravity, he couldn't help but reminisce more about his father Mick. Kai's eyes began to tear again, thinking about him. He had never shown his parents the appreciation they deserved. They had died because of him, caught as collateral in an attempt to ambush him while his guard was down. Seeing gravity magic on the list felt almost like a parting gift from his father to him. Besides, the idea of using gravity to crush or make his enemies submit sounded very, very enjoyable. He was sure he wouldn't go wrong with any of these elements. After another hour of debate, he decided to go with the one he couldn't stop thinking about. Gravity, he spoke clearly, despite knowing all he had to do was will the option in his mind. The element of gravity has been chosen. With a yap from Akane, he understood it as a good pick. With her approval, he moved on to the next projection that appeared in his head. Choose one class. Class options: warrior, swordsman, rogue, wizard, gravity influencer, vanguard, spellblade, enchanter, blacksmith. With only a certain number of skill slots per realm of magic, there could only be a limited number of skills, so picking the right class was very important to an individual's future, since their class directly influenced what skills were received. Kai pondered his options. There were quite a few class options available, although none had to do with healing or priest-like classes, which was fine with him, since he had no idea how he would be able to heal with gravity magic in any case. It was very important that Kai pick the right class to complement his chosen element. He didn't necessarily have to pick a class that would need a sword as a weapon either. Either mage or a warrior class would work well with gravity magic, but so would many others. The true goal was to pick a class that would give him the skills he desired. When he thought about the past, he had fought monsters both alone and in groups. Kai desired to be a balanced fighter capable of taking on any situation. As unrealistic as that was, it was the goal he aspired for. To do this, Kai had to pick a class that would grant him a balance between offense, defense, and utility skills. Basic classes such as warrior, wizard, or rogue were very standard in the world and common, giving them a bad reputation. However, some very powerful individuals had started with those basic classes only to have them evolve later into more unique or specialized classes. What was interesting was that one class even had gravity in its name, although that didn't mean much because it was a certainty that he would receive gravity skills in some semblance or another. Thinking it over more, mage and wizard-like classes were out. He didn't train with the sword to cower in the back and act as artillery. Likewise, stealth and rogue classes were eliminated. It was hard to be stealthy when your gravity magic crushes everything. I don't want to limit myself with pure warrior-type skills either, so that leaves either Spellblade or Vanguard. These were the two options that interested him the most out of all the available classes. Taking a closer look, Kai examined Spellblade, since it wasn't as self-explanatory as warrior or wizard. The Spellblades are a mixture between a warrior and a mage. Potent in sword combat and magic spells, their sword and magic are one. Spellblades are adept at moving through the battlefield, creating destruction as they use their imbued blade to destroy anyone who would stand in their way. With the help of their magic, they are a terror on the battlefield. Kai was stunned. Well, I'll be damned. That sounds incredible. I think we found a winner. Better check Vanguard, though, just to be safe rather than sorry. The Vanguard is a specialized force proficient in frontline combat. Swords, bows, magic, it doesn't matter what they use, their goal is to break the enemy's defense. With high risk comes high reward as they charge toward their foes and destroy them. Those who find success on the battlefield as a Vanguard will break their enemy's will to fight. Staring at the line, with high risk comes high reward, Kai couldn't help but become intrigued with it. Honestly, Spellblade sounds amazing, perfect for the style I want to use. While Vanguard is a bit vague and nondescript, it didn't take long for him to finalize his decision between Spellblade or Vanguard. In the end, Kai made his decision. Spellblade sounded incredible, something he had been training towards this entire time, but in the end, the description of Vanguard changed his mind. If I want to catch up to those people who have a 1200-year head start on me and get my revenge, I need to be risking myself against powerful enemies. And that part about breaking their will to fight sounds a lot more devastating than just being a terror on the battlefield. With slight hesitation, Kai selected Vanguard as his class. The changes began once again, only lasting a few seconds. It was as if his body was being attuned to his chosen class and element. Class chosen, Vanguard. Vitality is improved by 5%. Negative forces of pressure and gravity are reduced by 10%. Elemental magic resistance, +3. Physical resistance, +3. Kai's eyes went very wide. High risk, high reward indeed. The bonuses he received from picking the Vanguard class were staggering. It looks like gravity or pressure that could hurt or negatively affect him would be lessened by 10%. Even his own gravity magic would likely be included in that category. The elemental magic and physical resistance were the same as in his first life, in that they would give an additional 30% of resistance, increasing his natural resistance and skills resistances when those damage types were applied to him. And if he recalled correctly, humans received a 10% resistance to both, already when in the Foundation realm, bringing his total resistance increase to those damages by 40%. Not that his body would resist 40% of the total damage, just that his body was 40% more resistant to those respective types of damage. Next was the part of this entire situation he was looking forward to the most. Skill gained. Active, heavy blow. Use gravity to enhance the strength of your attack. Active, gravity pillar. Select a small area within sight. Gravity will increase in that small area. The number of pillars able to use at the same time is based on skill level. Mana cost is determined by distance from the user and size of the pillar. Active, domain. Increase gravity up to a distance of 10 memas around you. Passive, burden. All those under the effect of your gravity will have their stamina drain faster. The rate of stamina drain is dependent on gravitational forces. A wide smile covered Kai's face as he finally felt back to normal for the first time since his rebirth. The feelings of being without his magic had always felt like the loss of a limb. Now being in the Foundation realm, Kai would have 4 skills until he advanced his class to higher realms of magic. Calling upon his status screen, Kai scanned it. Name: Chaismo Cineris. Realm level: Foundation 17. Aspect: Gravity. Class: Vanguard. Race: Human. Health: 110, 110. Stamina: 100, 100. Mana: 100, 100. Vitality: 10, 11. Strength: 10. Dexterity: 10. Endurance: 10. Intelligence: 10. Wisdom: 10. Unspent attributes. Stats available: 85. Active skills: Heavy Blow, on 10. Gravity Pillar, 1-10. Domain, 1-10. Passive skills: Burden, marker 10. General skills: Identify. Pain tolerance, 1. Sense improvement, 1. Soul presence, 4. Magic resistance, 4. Physical resistance, 4. Not a bad start to my rise once again. Chapter 9. Trying New Skills. Kai walked back through the mists to Kitsune Village. Bursting with excitement, he was having a difficult time holding back from using and testing his new skills, but his family was probably nervously waiting for him to return home. He had been gone a few hours as he waited for his magic class to finally appear. His family had been very supportive, giving him his space during the process, despite them all wanting to assist him in picking. But Kai remained adamant until the end that this would be his responsibility. He couldn't help but skip in joy a little as he examined his magic class. Kai noticed a few things. The first being that he had a level of 17 already in the Foundation realm. Figuring it must be from defeating the occasional screaming forest boar during his training over the years, he probably would have received more levels if his father hadn't been supervising, reducing the risk factor greatly. Checking, he could see his kill history recorded, almost like a paper with words that were embedded in his mind. Your group has slain Screaming Forest Boar, Foundation Level 27. Your group has slain Screaming Forest Boar, Foundation Level 12. You have slain Screaming Forest Boar, Foundation Level 29, a total of 9 boars, averaging around level 15. With the 17 levels came 85 attribute points. The difficulty was figuring out where best to put them. He would be better off waiting until he was able to test his magic skills more and identify which attributes would benefit him most. What is most curious is that my first 2 kills have been considered group kills. I don't remember anyone helping or even being there. There were a lot of oddities about that first kill. The whole experience had seemed manufactured. Most of the boars postured or ran away unless you got really close to them. That first one had come right after him. Stopping for a few seconds, Kai decided to test his Identify skill. It was a skill that all humans possessed once they unlocked their magic. As unlikely as it was, he wanted to find out if anything had changed during that time with the skill. Focusing his eyes on a large old tree, he gave thought to the Identify skill. Aged Pine Tree. Although he had never identified an aged pine tree before in his past life, the process and result remained the same, at least for a tree. Kai planned to try it on all different objects and people when he got back to the village to see if anything was altered. Suddenly remembering he could identify living animals and people, he cast his gaze at Akane, who kept silently trotting at his side. Noticing his gaze, she stared back at him, arching one of her eyebrows. Forest Fox, Foundation Level 60. Kai's eyes widened in surprise. Level 60? I can't believe that lazy fox is actually level 60. Perhaps that could be low for their species. I'll have to compare it to the other foxes. The foxes remained a mystery to him even today. They were either seen sleeping or eating, but never anything else. Maybe they level up by eating. Would certainly explain their wanton gluttony. Putting the thought aside, Kai peered at the rest of his general skills. Pain Tolerance 1 was as expected. All humans in the Foundation realm had it. The 1 implies 10%. All pain Kai would experience in the future, physical or mental, would be diminished by 10%. It was often debated by people that pain resistance helped reduce the damage done to you. In a sense, that was true, as the mental trauma of experiencing pain might be reduced, but the damage inflicted physically was not. Too often, Kai heard people wish Pain Tolerance 1 also helped with emotional pain, but it didn't. Those poor saps had to deal with their heartbreak all on their own. Walking out of the mists, Kai could see that the villagers had gathered into two lines along the main pathway, starting right past the entrance, as if welcoming back a victorious hero. There was a clamoring among the villagers. Everyone became excited seeing Kai's glorious return. He felt his face heat up as everyone started excitedly cheering, whistling and clapping. Cringing, he covered his eyes with his hand, trying to avoid eye contact with everyone. Gods, this is such an embarrassing tradition. I asked them not to do this. The foxes even joined in, howling and yapping without end. His family and grandfather waiting in a group at the end of the line. His mother was a blubbering mess, tears falling down her smiling face. Past his mother, he was surprised to see Garen, who had been gone for many years. There was no smile, just a cold, hard glare from him. What the hell is his problem? Kai thought, staring daggers back at him. Ariel bolted from the family, not even waiting for him to finish his walk to them. Soaring across the ground, she reached him in seconds as she leaped with open arms into his chest. The rest of the family followed suit and joined them, with Garen walking especially slowly. Kai finished hugging everyone, including Garen, for appearance's sake, of course. Eyes gleaming with curiosity, Ariel barraged Kai with questions. What magic did you get? What class did you pick? Warrior, swordsman, summoner? Please tell me it was Ash swordsman. Jacob does my chores if I'm right. Give him some room to breathe, Ari, his father said, pulling her back. Can we talk about it when we go home? Kai asked, still red in the face as he looked around at the mass of people that had encircled his family. You might as well tell us now. No way your mother isn't going to tell everyone later anyways, Octavian said, giving his wife a side glance. With at least some decency to act embarrassed, his mother gave a small cough. Looking down, she was still smiling. The entire town quieted down as they waited for the big reveal. With a sigh, Kai knew his father would be right. It was pointless to try and hide his magic in the village. Gravity and Vanguard, Kai stated proudly aloud for everyone to hear. The response from the village and his family was a murmuring of confusion. Told you it would be weird, I win the bet, Jacob called. You said new magic and warrior. He isn't a warrior, Ariel called back, determined not to lose and do extra chores. Looking around, he saw that his mother and grandfather were smiling with happiness. What was concerning was his father staring at him with eyes of pity. Kai, would you please meet me in the training yard? His father called out to Kai, who had been staring at his screen non-stop since their family lunch ended half an hour ago. Strolling out to the courtyard, he found his father and older brother waiting for him. His father had an expression of seriousness, which was unusual to see. Garen's face was an indifferent blank stare, as if what was happening didn't concern him. Distracted by the festivities, Kai realized he had forgotten to use his identifier on his family during the meal. Human. Human? To be expected, Dad is in the 5th realm of power, or so he claimed, so his information wouldn't show up with identify. More shocking was that his brother was unable to be identified. That would mean he is already in the adept realm of power, or higher. Identify could be properly used on beings at most 1 realm of magic above your. Anything higher than that, it would be all question marks like the 2 before him. I would like to hear about what happened today, specifically your options and thought process, his father said, staring into his son's eyes, conveying his seriousness. You see, the affinity for gravity is very rare, even in more populated cities or planets. And even those who have an affinity for it often refrain from picking it. The difficulty and danger of using it can be substantial. Gravity requires a lot of precision and control. It is very possible you could hurt yourself or even endanger your own life or others if you misuse gravity magic. When put that way, Kai felt an explanation was necessary to defend his choice. He told them about his available options and choices, leaving out the part where he believed gravity to be a gift from his past life. Instead, he told his father that gravity magic seemed like a gamble. That if he could master it, he believed he would become very powerful. Even after the explanation, he still received looks of concern. Rubbing his chin, his father contemplated what he heard. 6 affinities, that's quite something. But this Vanguard class, it's not something I've ever heard of before. Not that it means much with thousands and thousands of classes available. Anyways, what's done is done. We have a few weeks to get you ready and able to use magic. Let's get started." His father had a proud smile on his face. The way it was described to me is, using magic is like using your arm. You will your arm to move through processes in your brain, and magic is no different. However, instead of using limbs, you have been in control of your entire life. It's as if you gained a third arm. It takes time and effort to be able to use magic instantly or unconsciously. Now I want you to... Stealing his father's thunder, Kai turned on his domain skill, enveloping the entire area in a very mild increase of gravity. The strain on his body was noticeable as he felt his weight increase slightly. Feels like I have small weights hanging off every part of my body. Wish I had access to gravity before, could have used it to train my body harder. Doesn't make much of a difference now because no matter what achievements I could make, training naturally will never compare to the development I make by leveling up and putting stats in. Clearing his throat, Octavian gave his son a proud smile. "I was going to say trying to turn one of your skills on. I am impressed. It's common for people to believe that all it takes is thinking of the skill to use it. It's more than that. What truly matters is willing it into existence, connecting that mana inside of you to take shape and form into your magic skill." Kai just smiled. "Well, it wasn't so easy the first time I tried using magic. I feel a little guilty earning that compliment, but I can't help that I was reborn." Kai noticed a drain on his mana. Already his mana was nearly gone. The area skill domain had a hefty drain on his resources after only half a minute. "You should have noticed your mana reserves have gone down. Do you mind telling me how much mana you have left?" Octavian asked. 9 out of 100, Kai replied. "Whoa, that's quite a mana-intensive spell, pretty strong for Foundation Realm too. I know it might not seem like it to our enhanced bodies, but you'll have to trust me on that. I'm not sure how to measure the increase in gravity without proper tools, so it will be up to you to find how much gravity is increased by when using your skills." While the increase in weight and pressure had been nothing for his father and brother, Kai had felt it. The increase in gravity could become detrimental to him if he had to fight in it right now. While he could still run under his domain skill, it would be more straining for him until he became used to it. "Do you know what stat the skill's modifier is based on?" Octavian asked. A gleam could be seen in his eye as he tried to help his son understand his new magic. Examining the skill further, Kai could instinctively feel the nature of his gravity spells would be based on his intelligence stat. "Yes, it's based on my intelligence stat," replied Kai. "Typical, most mage-type spells are. What is your intelligence stat right now? It's okay if you don't want to share with me, I'm just curious." 10, Kai answered honestly. He had yet to put any stats into his attributes. "All right, stay with me. I know you want to use your magic more, but it's important we figure this out, so you know what to put your stats into." Kai was aware of what his dad was trying to do. He was theory crafting, or that was the term his previous mother, the former video gamer, had dubbed it. The idea was to get all the information available to plan your build accordingly. Kai remained silent, appreciating the help his father was giving him. His brother remained in the background, yawning exaggeratedly. "My gravity seems like a double-bladed weapon. The skill increased my weight almost as much as it did yours," Kai stated. "Almost?" Kai told him about his Vanguard class bonus that reduced the effects of gravity magic by 10%. "That is a good bonus to have, but you're going to be under the burden of your own magic. You will need to be careful fighting people physically stronger than you, because they might have the advantage even under your own gravity. So unless I'm fighting someone physically weaker than me, or gain additional skills to better myself fighting under gravity, I might end up at a disadvantage even when using my own magic," Kai murmured while rubbing his forehead, lost in thought. "There is one more problem," stated Octavian. "Using your gravity magic and increasing your weight is going to make you burn through your stamina as well." Kai let out a sigh. His mood had gone from exuberated to melancholy. "Kai," his father said, his tone had a hard edge to it. "Gravity magic has the potential to be a very powerful tool, but it can also be very dangerous as well. You need to understand that your own gravity magic has the potential of crushing you or even killing you. It is vitally important that your constitution and strength stats are high enough to allow you to withstand the burden of your own magic. But that still won't be enough. You need to make it your own, your class, your gravity magic. Until it becomes natural for you, there will always be a risk. Chapter 10. Goodbyes as a new adventure begins. The trio walked through the mists. This was Kai's first time outside of the village with his older brother. By the time Kai had been able to train, his older brother had already left the village, only returning once for Lydia's 16th birthday. Peering at Garen, Kai noticed that he had the appearance of a proper adult now. Gone was the once smooth face of a child, he now sported a short, trimmed beard. Unbothered by what existed in the mists, he walked full of confidence and without a care in the world. He didn't look 8 years older than Kai, instead, he appeared more like 3 or 4 years older. Advancing in magic realms and levels had slowed down his body's aging. The faster he grew, the more youthful he would look for longer. His father would occasionally send out metallic objects into the distance beyond what Kai could see through the mists. After a minute, they would return to him before sending them out once again. "Dad, what are you doing?" Kai asked after watching him repeat the process once again for the 3rd time. "I'm sending out probes of sorts. These metal objects resonate in a way that detects moving objects or beings. I'm trying to find you some low-level monsters to fight, but apparently the guards hunted the area close to our home to near extinction, so I'm having difficulty finding something suitable," Octavian said. "Ah, found something," Octavian finally said after the 5th iteration of using his metal probes. His father changed direction. Although Kai was used to the mists, he was thoroughly lost now that he had traveled further than ever. When his father and brother stopped, Kai gazed around but was unable to see anything besides the usual trees, grass, and mists. Dad, where is it?" Kai asked, feeling awkward as his family stared at one tree in particular. Squinting his eyes, Kai stared at the tree until he finally saw a slight movement. Like a chameleon, it appeared as a part of the tree, camouflaged to his eyes. A snake had wrapped itself around the trunk of the tree. Its body was the same medium brown as the tree, making it difficult to perceive. It remained unmoving as they watched it, only its muscles contracting ever so slightly, giving hint that it was even there. Veiled Forest Snake, Foundation Level 37. Kai surmised from its name that it was a predator that ambushed its victims using its camouflage. With the element of surprise gone, he should have a better advantage fighting it. Its camouflaged form made it difficult to estimate its size, but it was no doubt longer than him. The body was about the size of his thigh. He guessed it wasn't large enough to swallow him if he screwed up. Not that he was worried. With his father here, he could be as reckless as he wanted. Before having his first fight with magic, he had to allocate his stats points. He had been so busy with celebrations and his family over the past few hours, he had forgotten to do so. Not that there had been a need to until now. His biggest issue at the moment was not knowing how to allocate his stats to benefit his abilities and class the best. Without using his magic more, he would have to take an educated guess on how to allocate them. His biggest problem was figuring out the ratio of his gravity intelligence to his vitality and strength. Too much intelligence and he might suffer. Too little and his gravity might become too weak. And that wasn't considering his other stats that were vitally important as well. From the conversation with his father and his previous experience, he had an idea of where to start allocating his stats. Making his choice, he hoped it wouldn't backfire for now. There was always a chance to fix his attributes when he leveled up and gained more of them. Vitality, 30, 31. Strength, 40. Dexterity, 15. Endurance, 20. Intelligence, 20. Wisdom, 20. He noticed that his vitality was 1 higher than he had allocated. Must be the 5% increase from my class. Meaning once he leveled it up to 100 vitality, his true vitality would actually be at 105, giving him an extra 50 health. Happy with his choices, for now he refocused on his opponent, who now had vanished from the tree. Face-palming, he had been too absorbed in his build and had forgotten about the sneaky snake. It was probably more accurate that his father had purposefully distracted him, putting him on the back foot in the fight. Looking around, he pulled his knife out, which was the only weapon he had on him. "Wait, wait, wait," his father called out, stopping him. Kai turned his head, wondering why his father would interrupt his very first battle with magic. I was going to give this to you tonight for your birthday present and take you hunting tomorrow, but alas, you couldn't wait to come out here and try your magic." His father sighed as a sword in a scabbard appeared in front of him, floating in the air. His arm moved faster than Kai could see as he grabbed it before gravity could bring it down. "Happy birthday once again." Octavian smiled wide, presenting the sheathed sword to him with both hands. Kai stared in wonder. The scabbard was a dark blue metal, about the same length as a short sword. Accepting the scabbard, Kai strapped it onto his belt. With the scabbard attached, Kai pulled the sword out. It was a single-edged short sword of a majestic blue, etched with silver glyphs and runes that lined both sides of the blade. The wrap on the handle was done in dark red leather, which felt very comfortable to grip, as if the handle was sized to his very hands. The weight was heavy, but nothing compared to what he had been using during his training. Short sword, cold iron enchanted. The Identify spell will tell you the basics of the sword, like its composition and if it's enchanted, which you can easily see that it is. Now, the short sword is made of cold iron, one of the best metals for dealing with the cold. The sword will never get brittle and break. Your older sister did the enchantments. It was her present to you. Each of the 3 enchantments has different functions. Pointing to the first rune, Octavian continued, "This rune will keep the blade sharp always, so you won't have to take it somewhere to be treated or resharpened after a battle. The second means that the blade will not rust over the passage of time, assuming the rune remains intact. The third is for durability. It will increase the blade's fortitude, so it won't break even under the toughest of enemies. Now, cold iron isn't the best, so don't be fighting dragons with it, but it's good enough for someone just starting out on their rise to power." Kai allowed his father to finish. He didn't dare interrupt, despite knowing all this already. He knew this would be one of those moments his father would cherish as he taught his son. Enchantments: sharpness +1, anti-rust +1, durability +1. Focusing on the enchantments themselves, he could see the exact ones applied on the blade. Though it didn't give a description of each enchantment, their names were self-explanatory even without an explanation from his father. Taking another moment to examine the blade, Kai returned it to its scabbard. Stepping up to his father, he strained his arms out wide and gave him a big hug. "Thank you, Dad. This means a lot. It's the best present I've ever received." A snort came from the side. His brother had been watching impassively this entire time. "You're welcome, son. Oh, before I forget." Octavian summoned another item from his spatial storage ring. A hard leather chest piece appeared suddenly. "I'm glad I didn't get iron or steel armor for you as I had intended. The weight of that armor combined with your gravity magic would be too much as you are right now." Taking the chest piece, he slipped the hard leather armor on over his head. It remained a little loose, but not enough to bother him. Its weight was noticeable, but not so much that it would slow him down. "Okay, sword and armor are ready. Did you allocate your stats yet?" his father asked. "Yep," Kai nodded. Now that all present distractions and interruptions were over, he turned his body to find the snake once more. "Crap. Where is it?" Kai looked all around him, but was unable to find it. During his stat distribution and being given a sword, the snake moved off the tree. He looked at his father, trying to search his eyes for the answer. But as if one step ahead, his father had his eyes closed with a mischievous smirk, not giving anything away. Turning to his brother, he looked at his face, who was staring back at his own with an expression that read, "Hurry this up, you suck." Typical brother stuff. Sighing, Kai continued looking. He occasionally turned back to his father, who remained smiling with his eyes closed. Maybe that's a clue. If I can't see it, perhaps I can hear it. Emulating his father, Kai closed his eyes and strained his ears. The mist forest was silent. He heard his heartbeat in his chest, thumping away at a fast pace. It was only after a minute of silence that he finally heard a rustle on the grass to his left. Opening his eyes, Kai turned to gaze at the location from where the noise came from. He saw nothing at first, but then the telltale sign of movement through its muscle contractions near where he heard the sound. The snake had been trying to sneak up on Kai. It was possible the creature had some intelligence, aware that it had been seen, or through pure coincidence, moved into a closer ambush spot when Kai was distracted. Kai's body began teeming with excitement. This would be his first official fight with a magic class in a long time. Jumping and stretching, he loosened his body, a savage grin on his face. He kept his eyes on the snake, making sure not to repeat his earlier failure. He was rusty and didn't want to mess this up. In front of his father and brother, he even wanted to show off a little bit. Dragging his new sword out, he held it forward with 2 hands. Gravity pillar, activated on the snake. He saw the grass flatten slightly under his spell. Giving up all pretenses of staying hidden, the snake moved towards him, still camouflaged. Kai watched the snake move out of the gravity pillar partially. Only its back half was still stuck in it. Although the gravity increase wasn't visible to him, he knew in his mind where the spell was located and its dimensions. Letting out an angry hiss, the snake reared up, springing forwards to attack. Not even hesitating, Kai brought his sword up between them. Smashing into the blade, the snake recoiled as Kai took a step back. A small amount of blood dripped down from a wound on its nose. Hissing, its mouth opened wide, obviously upset it hadn't been able to bite its prey. Kai spied finger-length fangs. Frowning, he imagined the pain of being pierced by the fangs. That wasn't even considering that the snake might be venomous. Seeing the snake had almost moved out of his gravity pillar, he cancelled it and activated another one in the middle of the snake's body, effectively slowing it. Taking the initiative, Kai charged forwards using heavy blow. An unseen pressure and weight descended onto his blade. Under its newfound weight, it swung down from overhead at lightning speeds. The sudden weight and momentum caused the blade to slip out of Kai's hands, plunging straight through the snake's head. The snake's body writhed as its head remained pinned to the ground, with the short sword straight through the middle of its eyes. Within seconds, the snake ceased its movements. You have slain Vale Forest Snake, Foundation Level 37. Vanguard has reached Foundation Level 20. Kai stared at his hands, flexing them gently as if injured. Dang, that was too much. The sword was ripped from my hands. That could have been bad if it hadn't landed on the snake. Putting his hand on the handle, he tugged only to pull it up an inch. It was firmly lodged into the ground, about half the blade concealed. Placing his foot on the snake's head, he grabbed the handle with both hands and tugged hard, the blade finally becoming loose after a few seconds. I guess that's one way to win. I was afraid of something like this happening. The problem is that the sword's weight and momentum of your spell are too much for you right now. Until you grow stronger, that may continue to happen if you use that skill. It's like suddenly putting a heavy ball of metal into someone's outstretched hands. If they aren't prepared physically or mentally, they're probably going to drop it, his father explained, while Garen gave a slow, sarcastic clap to the side. Sweetie, Mommy is going to miss you so much. Please come visit as often as you can, Kai's mother said while embracing him in a hug of death. Tears flowed down her cheeks. Kai had been afraid of this. He really wished she wouldn't cry, but that's just who she was. You have to let him go, honey. We were supposed to leave half an hour ago, Octavian called out from the front of their yard. Mum, please, Kai pleaded. I'll come back when I can. I promise, okay? Not good enough. You must send me a letter every week. No, every day. Despite feeling embarrassed about his mother coddling him, he felt warm inside. It had been conflicting to accept himself being treated as a child by his mother, seeing as how he had the mind of an adult, but it didn't take long for her to break down his walls. He accepted the situation and tried his best to be a good son growing up. Sniffing, she reluctantly let go of Kai. Although he towered over her, Kai still felt like a child when she did things like this. She had been spoiling him rotten for the last few weeks since he unlocked his magic. Knowing this day was coming, Kai had chosen not to train excessively or hunt monsters, like he had originally planned. Instead, he spent much of it with his family, relaxing and enjoying their company. Brother, don't trash our family's name when you're at the academy. I don't want to feel embarrassed when I attend school there, Jacob said, shuffling towards him. A sad smile could be seen under the false bravado of a smirk. Ha ha, Kai dryly laughed. I'll let you have that honor, little bro, Kai joked, stepping up and giving him a hug and pat on the back. Lydia walked up to Kai next. They stared at each other for a second before she reeled back her arm and punched him, her fist hitting his arm softly. Tears dripped down as she lowered her head. Don't die, please. She spoke softly, barely audible to Kai's ears. Kai suddenly embraced her in a hug. She embraced him back, putting her face into his shoulder. She rubbed her face back and forth. She is probably wiping off her tears, Kai thought as his shirt began feeling wet. After a minute, she let go. Kai noticed her eyes were red, her face reflecting the pain he felt inside. Kai turned to his last remaining family member who would not be traveling with him. Ariel stood still, only her shoulders shaking as she sobbed silently. He walked up to her, taking a knee. At 11 years old, she was still the baby of the family. With room to grow still, she stood only slightly taller than Kai's kneeling form. "Are you sure you have to go?" Ariel asked, with large tears streaming down her face to the soil below. Eyes watering, he sniffed, trying to hold back the raw emotions. "Yes," was all Kai could say as he tried to keep his voice from cracking. He held his arms open wide, waiting for her to move in. Without pause, she launched herself into Kai's arms, hugging him so tightly that even with his new enhanced strength, it still hurt a little. "Keep training and studying. I'll be back before you know it."